When a millionaire in a wheelchair rolled into a rundown garage, everyone thought they knew her story. Paralyzed, adapted, moving on. But the mechanic with grease-stained hands looked past the custom controls and expensive modifications and asked the one question that shattered a decade of certainty. When was the last time someone asked you to stand? What he revealed next, a red pendant from the night of her crash and the truth about what really happened in those critical moments, would force her to choose between the life she'd accepted and the one she'd been told was impossible. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The Mustang GT growled into the parking lot of Kohl's Auto Repair like a predator that had wandered into the wrong territory. It was sleek, midnight blue, and worth more than everything in the shop combined, including the building. The engine cut, and for a moment the only sound was the ping of cooling metal and the distant clatter of an impact wrench from somewhere deep in the garage. Ethan Cole didn't look up right away. He was elbow-deep in the engine of a '98 Civic, his hands black with oil, his mind calculating whether Mrs. Patterson could afford the timing belt replacement she desperately needed or if he'd have to eat the cost again. The overhead fluorescents buzzed, one of them flickering in that irregular rhythm that he kept meaning to fix but never quite got around to. "You Cole?" The voice came from behind him, female, sharp, the kind of tone that expected answers immediately. Ethan straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a rag that had long ago given up on actually getting clean. When he turned, he found himself looking at a woman who belonged in a boardroom or a magazine spread, not in a garage that smelled like motor oil and old coffee. She sat in a wheelchair, a high-end model, the kind with more engineering than most cars on the road. But it was the Mustang behind her that held his attention for a beat longer. Custom hand controls visible through the driver's window, modifications so seamless they almost disappeared into the original design. Someone had spent serious money making that car respond to her needs without broadcasting them. "That's me," Ethan said finally, his voice carrying the rough edge of too many early mornings and not enough sleep. "What can I do for you?" The woman rolled forward with practiced efficiency, her movements precise and controlled. She wore a cream-colored blazer over a black silk blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a style that probably had a French name he wouldn't know. Everything about her screamed money and control, except her eyes. Those carried something harder to name. Determination, maybe. Or defiance. "The accelerator response is off by 0.3 seconds, she said without preamble. "The resistance on the brake lever has changed. It's reading inconsistent pressure. And there's a vibration in the steering column that shouldn't be there given the last modification was only 6 months ago." Ethan blinked. Most people who walked into his shop said things like, "It makes a weird noise," or "Something doesn't feel right." This woman had diagnostics that would make a factory technician jealous. "You're Vivian Hale," he said. It wasn't a question. He'd seen her face before. In the business section of the newspaper, on the covers of regional magazines. Tech entrepreneur. Self-made millionaire by 30. The articles always mentioned the wheelchair in the same breath as her accomplishments, as if one explained the other. "I am." She raised an eyebrow. "Does that change whether you can fix the car?" "No, ma'am, just surprised to see you here. Most people with that kind of money go to specialty shops in the city." "Most specialty shops," Vivian said with an edge that could cut glass, "treat me like a fragile museum piece they're afraid to touch. I don't need sympathy. I need precision. Your reputation says you deliver that." Ethan glanced at the Mustang again, really looking this time. The modifications weren't just functional, they were elegant. Whoever had done the original work understood both engineering and aesthetics. But there was something else. Something that nagged at the edges of his attention. "Let me take a look," he said, already moving toward the car. Vivian followed, and Ethan was aware of her watching him with an intensity that felt like assessment. He opened the driver's door and slid into the seat, his hands automatically going to the custom controls. Hand throttle, brake lever, steering modifications that reduced the force needed without sacrificing responsiveness. He started the engine, listening to the rumble, feeling the vibration through his palms. Then he did something that made Vivian's jaw tighten visibly. He got out without touching a single control. "Well?" she demanded. Ethan closed the door carefully, then walked around the Mustang, his eyes tracking the lines of the chassis, The wear patterns on the tires, the slight asymmetry in how it sat on the suspension. When he completed his circuit, he leaned against the workbench and crossed his arms. "Your problem isn't the Mustang," he said quietly. The temperature in the garage seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Excuse me?" Vivian's voice was dangerously soft. "The modifications are perfect. 0.3 seconds on the accelerator is within normal variation for electronic systems. The brake pressure inconsistency is because you're gripping differently, probably from stress or fatigue. And the steering vibration?" He paused. "That's not the car. That's your arms compensating for muscle tension you're carrying in your shoulders." For a long moment, Vivian just stared at him. Her hands, Ethan noticed, had tightened on the wheelchair's armrests until her knuckles showed white. "You don't know anything about me," she said, each word crystalline with control. "I know you've been driving that car harder than you should. I know you're running on about 5 hours of sleep, and I know—" He stopped, something shifting in his expression. "I know you're looking for problems with the car because that's easier than looking at everything else." "That's incredibly presumptuous." Vivian's voice could have frozen nitrogen. "And completely out of line." "Maybe." Ethan didn't back down, but his tone gentled. "But I'm also right. I came here for mechanical work, not amateur psychology." She was already turning her wheelchair, ready to leave. "Ms. Hale." Something in Ethan's voice made her pause. "When was the last time someone asked you to stand?" The question hung in the air like a physical thing. Vivian went absolutely still, her back to him, her shoulders rigid with sudden tension. "That's not funny," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Wasn't trying to be funny. I'm asking you a serious question." Vivian spun the wheelchair around with controlled violence. "I was in a car accident 10 years ago. Spinal cord injury. T10 complete. 3 different specialists. 2 years of physical therapy, and a very expensive education in what irreversible means. Nobody asked me to stand because I can't. So you can take your inspirational moment bullshit and—" "I'm not selling inspiration," Ethan interrupted. "I'm asking when someone last asked you, really asked you, to try." "Why?" The word came out sharp and suspicious. "So you can prove some point about positive thinking, so you can feel good about yourself for encouraging the poor paralyzed woman?" Ethan shook his head slowly. "So I can know if anyone's been paying attention." Something in his expression, a combination of certainty and sadness, made Vivian's anger falter. She studied him more carefully now, seeing past the grease-stained work shirt and tired eyes. There was weight there, the kind that came from carrying responsibility that couldn't be shared or put down. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice losing some of its edge. "Come back tomorrow," Ethan said. "Without the Mustang. Give me 1 hour of your time." "For what?" "To see if I'm right or crazy. Either way, you'll know." "This is insane." But Vivian didn't leave. "You're a mechanic, not a doctor." "True, but I'm also someone who pays attention to things other people miss." He pulled a business card from his shirt pocket. Simple, just his name and number. "Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. If I'm wasting your time, I'll do the modifications to your Mustang for free." Vivian took the card, her fingers brushing his briefly. "And if you're not wasting my time, then we'll figure that out together?" She looked at the card, then at him, then at the Mustang that had been her carefully controlled world for a decade. Every instinct told her to leave, to dismiss this whole bizarre encounter as a waste of time. But something, maybe the way he'd looked at the car before looking at her, maybe the complete absence of pity in his eyes, maybe just the sheer audacity of the question, made her pause. 1 hour, she said finally, and this better not be some kind of faith-healing nonsense. "It's not. I promise." Vivian nodded once, sharp and decisive, then turned her wheelchair and headed for the door. She transferred into the Mustang with practiced efficiency, and a moment later the engine roared to life. Ethan watched her pull out of the parking lot with that same predatory grace, the Mustang disappearing into afternoon traffic. When the sound faded, he walked back to the Civic and Mrs. Patterson's timing belt, but his mind was already somewhere else, 10 years back, on a rain-slicked road, in the moments that had changed everything. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his sister. "Jake's asking when you're picking him up. Should I tell him 6 again?" Ethan checked his watch, 4:47 p.m. He typed back quickly. On my way now. Thanks for covering. He grabbed his jacket from the hook by the office, killed the lights in the main bay, and locked up. The drive to his sister's house took 20 minutes in good traffic, 30 in bad. Today it was somewhere in between, giving him too much time to think about what he'd just done. 10 years was a long time to carry a secret, Kim. Long enough that some nights he almost convinced himself it didn't matter, that knowing wouldn't change anything. But then someone like Vivian Hale would roll into his life, and all the rationalizations would crumble. He'd been there. Not just at the scene, but there. Close enough to hear the screaming metal, the shattering glass, the terrible silence that followed. Close enough to see a young woman trying desperately to move, to get out, while someone shouted at her to stay still, that help was coming, that moving might make it worse. The question that haunted him, had staying still made it worse? He pulled up to his sister's modest two-story just as the sun was starting its descent toward the horizon. Before he could get out, the front door burst open and a 7-year-old tornado named Jake came barreling down the driveway. "Dad!" Jake crashed into him with the full-body enthusiasm that only small children possessed. "Aunt Lisa said we're having pizza tonight." Did she now? Ethan scooped his son up, feeling the familiar weight, breathing in the scent of playground dirt and little kids' sweat. "And what did you do to deserve pizza?" "I finished my math homework without complaining, and I only argued about vegetables a little bit." Lisa appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a smile that was equal parts affection and exhaustion. She was 3 years younger than Ethan, with the same dark hair and the same tendency to carry other people's burdens as her own. "He was actually great today," she said, as Ethan approached with Jake still wrapped around him like a koala. "But that math homework was definitely a team effort." "Fractions?" Ethan guessed. "Fractions," Lisa confirmed. "Why do they teach this stuff so early now?" "Because we're raising a generation of engineers," Ethan said, setting Jake down so he could grab his son's backpack from inside. "Or torturing parents. Could go either way." Lisa handed him his bag, then studied his face with the kind of attention that only siblings could muster. "You okay? You've got that look." "What look?" "The one that says you're chewing on something bigger than Mrs. Patterson's timing belt." Ethan glanced at Jake, who was already halfway to the truck, then back at his sister. "Vivian Hale came into the shop today." Lisa's eyes widened slightly. "The Vivian Hale? Tech millionaire Vivian Hale?" "That's the one." "What did she want?" "No, wait, don't tell me. That modified Mustang I've seen in the business magazines?" "Something like that." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "I might have done something stupid." "How stupid are we talking?" "I asked her to come back tomorrow, without the car, to talk." Lisa was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, "Ethan, tell me you're not going to—" "I don't know what I'm going to do," he interrupted, "but I can't just let it go. Not this time." "It's been 10 years. What makes you think she'd even believe you?" "I kept something from that night." He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. Lisa knew the story, had heard it enough times in those early months when he'd wake up in cold sweats, replaying every second. "And you think showing her some piece of evidence is going to change a decade of medical diagnoses? Of her entire life built around a reality that 3 different specialists confirmed? I think someone needs to ask the questions that everyone else was too afraid to ask, or too tired, or too worried about liability." "Ethan," Lisa's voice softened, "I love that you care. I love that you want to help. But you can't fix everything. And you can't fix everyone. I'm not trying to fix her. I'm trying to give her information she deserves to have. Information that might destroy the life she's built. Have you thought about that? What if you're right, and she finds out she spent 10 years in a wheelchair because someone was overcautious? What if you're wrong, and you give her false hope? Either way, you're not a doctor. You're a mechanic with a good heart and a tendency to take on other people's pain." Jake called from the truck. "Dad, are we getting pizza or not?" "Yeah, buddy, we're getting pizza," Ethan called back, then turned to Lisa again. "I hear you, but I have to at least try." Lisa sighed, then pulled him into a quick hug. "I know, just be careful, okay? For her sake and yours, And Jake's. Always am. Liar. Ethan smiled despite everything, then headed to the truck where Jake was already buckled in and vibrating with 7-year-old impatience. The drive to the pizza place was filled with Jake's running commentary about school, recess, and the injustice of having to learn fractions when video games existed. But Dad, when am I ever going to need to know that 2/3 plus 1/3 equals 1 whole? I can just use a calculator. Sure, Ethan said, pulling into the parking lot. But what happens when the calculator's broken and you need to split a pizza evenly between 3 people? Jake considered this with the gravity it deserved. I'd just eat the whole pizza myself. Fair point. Inside, they ordered their usual large pepperoni with extra cheese, breadsticks because Jake had decided they were essential to life, and 2 sodas that Ethan would later regret allowing this close to bedtime. They found a booth in the back, the red vinyl cracked but comfortable, the air heavy with garlic and tomato sauce. Dad? Jake said around a mouthful of pizza that Ethan pretended not to notice violated every table manner they'd ever discussed. Yeah, bud? Why do some people use wheelchairs? Ethan's hand froze halfway to his own slice. What makes you ask that? There's a new kid at school, Emma. She has a wheelchair with these really cool light-up wheels, but some of the other kids were being weird about it. Weird how? Jake shrugged, suddenly focused on picking pepperoni off his slice and eating them individually. Like asking if she was sick, or if it was contagious, or saying she was lucky because she gets to sit down all the time. Ethan took a breath, choosing his words carefully. People use wheelchairs for lots of reasons. Sometimes they're born with conditions that affect how their bodies work. Sometimes they get hurt or sick. Sometimes it's temporary, sometimes it's permanent. But the wheelchair isn't the important part. Emma is the important part. That's what I said. Jake looked up, animated now. I told Tommy that Emma's really good at art and that she's faster than him in the hallway races even with the wheelchair. He said that was showing off. Tommy sounds like he might be a little scared or confused. Sometimes when people don't understand something, they act weird about it. Were you ever scared of someone in a wheelchair? The question landed like a punch. Ethan thought about Vivian Hale, about the way she'd looked at him with such fierce independence, such absolute refusal to be pitied, about the woman on the rain-slicked road 10 years ago, and all the fear and confusion of that night. Yeah, he said honestly. I was. But not because of the wheelchair, because I didn't know how to help, and that made me feel useless. But you help people all the time. That's your job. With cars, sure. With people. Ethan trailed off. That's different. People are complicated. You can't just look up the problem in a manual and order the right part. Is that why you always look sad when you think I'm not watching? The observation hit harder than it should have. Ethan reached across the table and ruffled Jake's hair, earning a protest and a grin. I'm not sad, buddy. Just tired sometimes. Running a business and being a dad is a lot of work. You're a really good dad, though. Something in Ethan's chest tightened and loosened at the same time. Thanks, Jake. You're a pretty good kid yourself. Even with the fractions? Even with the fractions. They finished their pizza in comfortable silence, Jake swinging his legs under the booth and humming tunelessly. Ethan watched his son and thought about all the things he was trying to teach him. Kindness, honesty, the importance of asking questions even when they were uncomfortable. And he wondered if he was about to practice what he preached or make a terrible mistake. Back at their small apartment, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that barely deserved the name, Ethan supervised teeth brushing and listened to Jake read from his current favorite book about a kid who built a rocket ship out of cardboard boxes. When he finally tucked his son into bed, Jake grabbed his hand. Dad, is the lady with the fancy car okay? What lady? I saw her when Aunt Lisa drove by your shop today. She had a wheelchair too, like Emma. Ethan should have known. Jake noticed everything. She's okay. She just needed some work on her car. Are you going to help her? I'm going to try. Good. Jake yawned, already half asleep. That's what you do. Ethan stayed there for a moment, watching his son's breathing slow and even out, feeling the weight of that simple faith. That's what you do. As if it were that simple. As if trying were always enough. He retreated to the living room, poured himself a glass of water, because coffee this late would guarantee insomnia, and pulled out the small cardboard box he kept in the back of his closet. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper that had yellowed with age, was a red pendant on a broken silver chain. He'd found it at the scene, half buried in the grass where they'd pulled Vivian from the wreckage. Had meant to turn it in to the police, to Lost and Found, to someone official. But in the chaos of statements and aftermath, he'd forgotten. By the time he remembered, weeks had passed, and it felt too late, too strange to explain. So he'd kept it. A small piece of evidence, a reminder of the night when he'd arrived seconds too late to prevent the crash, but early enough to see everything that happened after. The pendant was simple, a red stone, probably garnet, set in tarnished silver. The chain had broken in the accident, but the pendant itself was intact. He turned it over in his hands, remembering. She'd been conscious when he'd pulled over, his own heart hammering from the close call of nearly hitting the already crashed vehicles himself. The other car, the one that had swerved into her lane, was empty, the driver having fled the scene. But Vivian's Mustang was crumpled against a guardrail, steam rising from the engine, and through the shattered driver's window he could see her moving, trying to move. She was making sounds, pain, panic, confusion, and reaching for the door handle with shaking hands. He'd run to her, shouting without thinking, "Don't move! Help is coming! Don't move!" She'd looked at him, her eyes wide and terrified, and stopped. Just stopped. And then the paramedics had arrived, and they'd said the same thing. Don't move, stabilize the spine, careful, careful, careful. And by the time they'd gotten her out and into the ambulance, she wasn't moving her legs anymore. Had she been able to before? In those first moments? He'd replayed the scene 1,000 times, trying to be sure, trying to separate what he'd actually seen from what his guilty conscience had invented. And he'd never been certain enough to say anything, to insert himself into a tragedy that wasn't his to claim. Until today. Until Vivian Hale had rolled into his shop with perfect posture and perfect control, and a Mustang modified for a life sentence that maybe, possibly, shouldn't have been. Ethan wrapped the pendant back up and put it away. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock, he'd find out if he was helping or hurting, if he was giving her a chance or destroying her peace. Either way, he thought, as he finally headed to bed, at least he'd stop being a coward. The next morning crawled by with agonizing slowness. Ethan worked on Mrs. Patterson's Civic, changed oil on 2 trucks and a sedan, and diagnosed a mysterious rattle in a Honda that turned out to be a loose heat shield. Normal work, routine work, the kind of problems that had clear solutions and definitive endings. At 1:45, he washed his hands, changed into a clean shirt he kept in the office, and tried not to watch the clock. At 1:57, he heard the distinctive sound of an expensive wheelchair's electric motor, and his heartbeat kicked up several notches. Vivian appeared in the doorway of the shop, backlit by afternoon sun, and for a moment Ethan saw her as she must see herself, powerful, in control, expecting the world to accommodate her rather than the other way around. She'd dressed down slightly, slacks instead of a skirt, a simple blouse instead of the blazer, but she still carried herself like someone who owned boardrooms. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice neutral. "I'm here, though I'm still not sure why." "Because you're curious," Ethan said, gesturing to the small office he'd cleaned up. It wasn't much, a desk, 2 chairs, filing cabinets that had seen better decades. But it was private, and it was quiet. And because you're the kind of person who needs to know the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Vivian rolled into the office, and Ethan closed the door behind them. She positioned herself across from the desk, her expression carefully neutral, her hands relaxed on the armrests in a way that somehow conveyed skepticism. "So," she said, "what's this about? Some miracle cure you read about online? A supplement? Magnets?" "Nothing like that." Ethan sat down, the desk between them feeling like both a barrier and a necessity. "I'm going to tell you a story, and then I'm going to ask you some questions, and then—" He paused. "Then we'll see." That's magnificently vague. I know, bear with me. Ethan took a breath. 10 years ago, on a Thursday night in October, there was a car accident on Highway 47, around 11 p.m. A silver sedan ran a red light and clipped a midnight blue Mustang GT, forcing it into the guardrail. Vivian's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Recognition and wariness. The driver of the sedan fled the scene, Ethan continued. The driver of the Mustang was trapped in the vehicle. First responder time was approximately 8 minutes, but there was someone else there, another driver who stopped to help. He met her gaze steadily. That was me. The silence stretched out, taut as a wire. Vivian's hands had tightened on the armrests, but her voice remained controlled. You were at my accident. I was. And you're just mentioning this now? 10 years later? I didn't know how to mention it before. Didn't know if it mattered. But yes, I was there. I was the one who told you not to move. I was the one who held your hand while we waited for the ambulance. And I was the one... His voice roughened. I was the one who found this. He pulled out the tissue paper package and carefully unwrapped the red pendant, laying it on the desk between them. Vivian stared at it like he'd produced a ghost. Her hand moved almost involuntarily toward her throat, touching the place where a necklace might hang. I lost that. In the crash. I thought it was gone forever. I found it in the grass, meant to turn it in, but in the chaos, I forgot. By the time I remembered, I didn't know how to explain having it without sounding like... He gestured helplessly. This. Like a creep who kept a souvenir from someone's trauma? Yeah. That. Vivian reached out slowly and picked up the pendant, turning it over in her fingers. Her expression had gone somewhere distant, somewhere painful. My grandmother gave me this. Before she died. I wore it every day for 5 years. I'm sorry I didn't get it back to you sooner. That's what you wanted to tell me? That you found my necklace? But her voice lacked the sharpness from before. She was still looking at the pendant, and Ethan could see her throat working as she swallowed. No. That's just proof that I'm telling you the truth about being there. What I wanted to tell you is what I saw. What I remember. The medical reports were very thorough, Mr. Cole. I've read them all multiple times. T10 complete spinal cord injury, immediate and total loss of motor function below the injury site. 3 specialists confirmed. You were moving, Ethan interrupted quietly. Vivian's head snapped up. What? When I got to your car, before the paramedics, you were trying to get out. You were moving your legs. That's impossible. The impact caused damage, yes, but in those first minutes you were moving. Panicked, in pain, but moving. And He forced himself to continue. I told you to stop. I shouted at you not to move, and you listened. The color had drained from Vivian's face. No, that's not... The doctor said the injury was instant, that the damage was done on impact, that nothing could have changed. What if they were wrong? Ethan leaned forward, not maliciously, not even incompetently. But what if, in an abundance of caution, they immobilized you so thoroughly that your body forgot how to try? What if don't move became can't move, because everyone was so focused on preventing further damage that no one asked if the damage was as complete as they thought? Vivian was shaking her head, but tears had started tracking down her cheeks. Stop. Just stop. You don't know what you're talking about. I've lived with this for 10 years. I've adapted. I've built a life. You can't just walk in here and... When was the last time you tried? Ethan asked gently. Not physical therapy designed around a diagnosis of complete paralysis. Not exercises to strengthen what you have left. When was the last time someone asked you to actually try to stand? Because I can't. The words came out ragged, torn from someplace deep. I can't, and asking me to try is cruel, and I'm asking you to feel, Ethan said, right now. Close your eyes if you need to. And tell me honestly, if you feel absolutely nothing below your waist, or if maybe there's something, pressure, temperature, anything. This is insane. Probably, but you came back. You could have ignored me, could have written me off as some crazy mechanic with a savior complex. But you came back because some part of you wonders too. Vivian wiped at her tears with angry, frustrated movements. But she didn't leave. She sat there, the pendant clutched in one hand, her breathing uneven, her entire world clearly shaking on its foundations. I don't know what you want from me, she whispered. Nothing, Ethan said. I don't want anything. But I think you deserve to know what I saw. You deserve to ask questions that maybe no one else was brave enough to ask. And you deserve... He paused. You deserve someone who looks at you and doesn't see a diagnosis. Who sees a person who had something terrible happen and who's been told for 10 years that the door is closed when maybe it was just locked? And if you're wrong, if I spend energy and hope and time chasing something impossible, then you'll know for sure, and you can stop wondering. Vivian was quiet for a long time, her fingers tracing the outline of the pendant. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, in a way that didn't match her usual commanding presence. What do you want me to do? Right now? Just feel. Don't move. Don't try anything. Just close your eyes and pay attention to your body. Not what you think you should feel, what you actually feel. This is ridiculous. Maybe. Do it anyway. After a long hesitation, Vivian closed her eyes. Her jaw was tight, her shoulders tense, but she sat there, breathing, focusing. Ethan waited, watching the emotions play across her face. Skepticism, frustration, concentration, and then something else. Surprise, confusion. Her eyes opened, meeting his with an expression of such vulnerable uncertainty that it hurt to look at. I feel warmth in my thighs, but that's probably just referred sensation or it's real, Ethan said, and it's worth investigating. I can't afford to hope like this. It'll destroy me. Then we won't call it hope. We'll call it data collection. We'll call it asking questions. We'll call it whatever you need to call it to make it feel safe. But please, Vivian, give yourself permission to at least look. She held his gaze for a long moment, and Ethan saw the war happening behind her eyes, between the life she'd built and accepted and the terrifying possibility that it hadn't been necessary, between the safety of certainty and the danger of questioning everything. Finally, she nodded, just once, barely perceptible. Okay, she whispered. Tell me what to do. And Ethan, who'd been carrying the weight of that October night for a decade, who'd second-guessed himself 1,000 times, who had no medical degree and no business making promises he couldn't keep, said the only thing he could say, we start small, we go slow, and we don't give up until we know for sure. It wasn't hope he was offering, it was just permission. Permission to question, permission to try, permission to stand, even if only in the attempt. And sometimes, Ethan thought as Vivian straightened her shoulders and wiped away the last of her tears, permission was the most powerful thing you could give someone who'd been told for too long that they didn't deserve it. The first session lasted exactly 47 minutes, and by the end of it, Vivian felt like she'd run a marathon while sitting perfectly still. Ethan had pulled a folding chair from the corner of the office and positioned it in front of her wheelchair, sitting close enough that their knees nearly touched. He'd started with questions that felt absurd in their simplicity. Could she feel the texture of her slacks against her skin? Could she sense the temperature difference between the parts of her body touching the wheelchair and those exposed to air? Could she detect any sensation at all when he placed his hand lightly on her knee without telling her where he was touching? I don't know, she'd said to that last one, frustration bleeding into her voice. I think I feel something, but it might just be wishful thinking. How am I supposed to tell the difference? You're not. Not yet. Ethan's voice had remained steady, patient in a way that somehow didn't feel condescending. Right now we're just gathering information. No judgment, no expectations, just data. Data, Vivian repeated, latching onto the word like a lifeline. She could deal with data. Data was safe, objective, quantifiable. Data didn't require hope. He'd walked her through a series of tests so subtle they barely qualified as movement, trying to flex muscles she hadn't consciously controlled in a decade, attempting to shift her weight in ways the wheelchair's support made nearly impossible to detect. Most attempts yielded nothing. But twice, maybe 3 times, she'd felt something. A flutter. A suggestion of response. So faint it could have been imagination, but there nonetheless. When Ethan finally sat back and checked his watch, Vivian was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion and everything to do with emotional whiplash. That's enough for today, he said, and she almost argued before realizing she was grateful for the reprieve. So? She hated how small her voice sounded. What's the verdict? Am I chasing shadows, or is there something actually there? Ethan met her gaze with that same careful honesty he'd shown from the beginning. I think there's something, but I also think it's going to take time to figure out what that something means. Your body's been receiving the same message for 10 years. Don't try, can't work, movement impossible. We're asking it to consider a different possibility, and that's not going to happen overnight. Time, Vivian laughed, but it came out bitter. I've already lost 10 years. How much more time am I supposed to invest in, maybe? That's not a question I can answer for you. Ethan stood, giving her space, giving her the power to choose. But I can tell you this, I'll be here tomorrow at 2 if you want to try again. And the day after that, and the day after that, for as long as it takes to get you real answers. Why? The question burst out before she could stop it. Why do you care? You don't know me. This isn't your responsibility. You could have just fixed my car and sent me on my way. Something shifted in Ethan's expression, a shadow of old guilt crossing his features. Because I was there. Because I told you not to move, and maybe that was the right call, or maybe it wasn't. But either way, I've been carrying that night around for 10 years. And if there's even a chance that my caution contributed to your diagnosis, then yeah, it kind of is my responsibility. That's not fair to you. You were trying to help. Maybe. But impact matters more than intention. He moved toward the door, then paused. Look, you don't owe me anything. Not your time, not your trust, not another session. But if you decide you want to keep digging, I'm here. No pressure, no promises. Just possibility. Vivian sat in the office for a long time after he left, staring at the red pendant in her palm, feeling the weight of a choice that shouldn't have to exist. The smart thing would be to leave, to go back to her carefully constructed life, to write this off as a bizarre detour and nothing more. But she'd felt something. Maybe just pressure, maybe just referred sensation from muscles that still worked affecting nerves that supposedly didn't, but something. And Vivian Hale hadn't built a multi-million-dollar company by walking away from possibilities just because they were terrifying. She returned the next day, and the day after that. By the end of the first week, they'd established a routine. 2 o'clock sessions, 45 minutes to an hour, in the small office that smelled like motor oil and old coffee. Ethan would start with the same baseline questions. What do you feel? Where do you feel it? Rate the sensation on a scale from 0 to 10. Then they'd move into gentle attempts at voluntary movement, Ethan's hands providing tactile feedback and support, while Vivian tried to reconnect with muscles that had been dormant for a decade. Progress, if you could call it that, came in increments so small they were almost insulting. The ability to sense when Ethan touched her right knee versus her left. A faint warmth in her thighs when she focused hard enough. Once, just once, what might have been the beginning of a muscle contraction in her right quadriceps that lasted all of 2 seconds before disappearing. I felt it, she'd gasped, her hand shooting out to grab Ethan's arm. Did you see that? Tell me you saw that. I saw it. His voice had been carefully neutral, but his eyes held something that looked like cautious excitement. Do it again. She'd tried. For 10 minutes, she'd tried with every ounce of concentration she possessed. But the moment had passed, the connection severed, and eventually she'd slumped back in frustration, tears threatening at the edges of her vision. It's gone. Whatever it was, it's gone. For now, Ethan had said, but you did it once. That means it's possible. We just have to figure out how to make it repeatable. Vivian had gone home that night and done something she hadn't done in years. She'd researched incomplete spinal cord injuries, neuroplasticity, cases of delayed recovery. The medical literature was dense and often contradictory, but certain themes emerged. The brain could rewire itself given time and proper stimulus. Injuries initially classified as complete sometimes proved incomplete upon further testing. Function could return months or even years after the initial trauma, though the likelihood decreased significantly as time passed. 10 years was a long time, but not impossible, just improbable. She'd fallen asleep at her computer, surrounded by medical journals and case studies. Her dreams a confused tangle of walking and falling and trying to remember what it felt like to stand on her own 2 feet. The second week brought a complication Vivian hadn't anticipated. Her body started responding to the sessions in ways that had nothing to do with her legs. Her shoulders ached from the tension of trying so hard. Her hands developed blisters from gripping the wheelchair armrests during particularly intense attempts at movement. And worst of all, she started sleeping poorly, her unconscious mind churning through possibilities and fears in equal measure. "You look tired," Ethan observed on Tuesday afternoon, his mechanic's eye catching what she'd tried to hide with makeup and sheer force of will. "I'm fine." "You're exhausted. When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours?" "I don't need a nursemaid, Mr. Cole. I need you to help me figure out if my body can do what we think it can do." He'd studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Fair enough, but we're cutting today's session to 30 minutes. Pushing when you're this tired is counterproductive." I don't want to cut the session. I want to... Vivian. The use of her first name stopped her mid-sentence. He'd been scrupulously formal until now, maintaining professional distance despite the intimacy of what they were doing. "You're running on fumes. I can see it. Your concentration is shot, your muscles are tense, and you're compensating for fatigue with adrenaline. That's not sustainable. What I'm doing isn't supposed to be sustainable. It's supposed to be effective. Then let me tell you what I tell Jake when he's working himself into a tantrum over homework. Sometimes the best thing you can do is step back, breathe, and come at it fresh. Grinding yourself into dust doesn't make you stronger, it just makes you dust." The comparison to a 7-year-old should have been insulting. Instead, it made her laugh, a real laugh, the first one she'd produced in days. "Did you just compare me to your son having a meltdown over fractions? If the tantrum fits..." But Ethan was smiling too, and some of the tension in the room dissipated. "Look, I get it. You're used to pushing through, used to sheer determination solving problems. But this isn't a business deal or a coding challenge. This is your body, and bodies have limits. Respect them." Vivian wanted to argue, to insist she knew her limits better than he did. But the truth was, she didn't know her limits anymore. She'd spent 10 years defining herself by what she couldn't do. Learning what she might be able to do required a completely different kind of awareness. 30 minutes, she conceded. "But we're doing this again tomorrow. Wouldn't have it any other way." That abbreviated session yielded something unexpected. With less pressure to perform, less desperation driving every attempt, Vivian found herself able to detect sensations she'd been too tense to notice before. The weight of gravity on her legs, the subtle shift of air temperature when Ethan moved his hands, and when he asked her to try flexing her right foot, something she'd been attempting unsuccessfully for days, she felt a response. Not visible, not strong enough to create actual movement, but there, definite and undeniable. "I felt that," she said, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. "In my ankle. I felt it." Ethan's hand was on her ankle, his thumb positioned where he could detect even the smallest muscular change. Again, slowly. She tried, focusing on the mental pathway between intention and action, imagining the signal traveling down her spine, jumping whatever gaps existed, reaching the muscle. And again, there it was, a flicker of response, like a light bulb flickering on a faulty circuit. "It's there," Ethan confirmed, and this time his voice held undisguised amazement. "Faint, but it's there. Vivian, you're recruiting muscle fibers that haven't fired in a decade." The magnitude of that statement hit her like a physical force. She'd spent 10 years being told her legs were as useful as wood below the injury site. 10 years of specialists explaining with charts and diagrams exactly why recovery was impossible. 10 years of building a life around a certainty that was now showing cracks. "What does this mean?" she whispered. Ethan sat back, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she'd come to recognize as his tell when he was thinking hard. "Honestly, I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I can't tell you what's possible or what the ceiling is. But it means your injury isn't as complete as everyone thought, and that means you have options." Options. She tested the word, found it both terrifying and exhilarating. "I need to see a specialist, a neurologist, someone who actually knows what they're looking at." Probably a good idea. "But I don't want to stop the sessions, not yet. Not until I have more to show them than just this." She gestured vaguely at her legs, at the invisible progress that felt both monumental and impossibly fragile. "Then we keep going. But Vivian, promise me something." "What?" "Don't put all your hopes in this. Don't stop living your life while you chase what might be possible. I've seen people destroy themselves chasing recovery, and I won't be part of that. We do this sustainably, or we don't do it at all." It was the first time he'd put conditions on his help, and Vivian recognized it for what it was. Not control, but care. The same kind of care he probably showed Jake, setting boundaries not to limit but to protect. "I promise," she said. "But you have to promise me something too." "What's that?" "Stop treating me like I'm fragile. I'm not going to break just because I'm trying something difficult. I've built a company from nothing, survived a decade of people telling me what I can't do, and learned to navigate a world that wasn't designed for me. I'm tougher than I look." Ethan's expression softened with something that looked like respect. "Deal. Though for the record, I never thought you were fragile. Stubborn, maybe. Relentless, definitely. But fragile? No." The third week brought Jake. Vivian arrived for her Tuesday session to find Ethan in the office with a small boy who had his father's dark hair and a gap-toothed smile that could probably charm birds from trees. "I'm so sorry," Ethan said immediately, standing up from where he'd been helping Jake with homework at the desk. "Lisa had an emergency at work and couldn't keep him. I can reschedule if you want privacy." Vivian looked at the boy, who was looking back at her with open curiosity, but no pity, no weird discomfort, just the straightforward interest of a child encountering something new. "It's fine," she said, surprising herself. "We can work around him." "You sure? We're doing fraction word problems, so the intellectual discourse is riveting." "Hi," Jake said, waving at Vivian. "I'm Jake. Are you the lady with the cool car? Dad says you have a Mustang with special controls. That sounds really awesome." "I am," Vivian said, finding herself smiling, "and it is pretty cool. Can I see it sometime?" "I promise I won't touch anything. I'm very good at looking without touching. Ask Dad." "That is a significant exaggeration," Ethan said, but his voice was warm with affection. "Jake, Ms. Hale is here for an appointment. Why don't you finish your homework while we work, okay?" "Okay. But if you need help with fractions, I'm kind of an expert now." The session proceeded with Jake as an unexpectedly pleasant background presence. He worked quietly on his math, occasionally asking Ethan questions that required brief interruptions. But his presence changed the dynamic somehow, made the whole thing feel less like a medical procedure and more like life. Normal, messy, human life. Halfway through, while Vivian was attempting to sustain a muscle contraction in her calf, Jake looked up from his homework and said, "Are you trying to make your legs work again?" The question, delivered with such casual directness, should have been jarring. Instead, Vivian found it refreshing. "Something like that," she said. "That's cool. There's a girl at my school, Emma, who uses a wheelchair too. She's really fast at racing in the hallways. Are you fast?" "Jake," Ethan said, a warning in his voice. "It's okay," Vivian assured him. "And yes, I can be pretty fast when I want to be. These wheels have good motors." "Awesome. Hey, if your legs start working, are you going to stop using the wheelchair?" It was the kind of question only a child would ask. Guileless, curious, cutting right to the heart of things adults danced around. Vivian considered it seriously. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Maybe sometimes, maybe not. It depends on what my body can do and what feels right." "That makes sense, like how I can walk, but sometimes I still want Dad to carry me when I'm tired." "Exactly like that." Jake nodded, satisfied, and returned to his fractions. Ethan met Vivian's eyes over his son's head, a question in his expression. She nodded slightly. "It's fine, really," and they continued. Later, after the session ended and Ethan was packing up Jake's homework, the boy approached Vivian directly. "Ms. Hale, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Does it hurt? Trying to make your legs work?" Vivian thought about the question carefully. "Sometimes. Not in a bad way exactly. More like when you're learning something really hard at school, and your brain gets tired from thinking so much. It's that kind of hurt." "Oh, like fractions." "Exactly like fractions." Jake considered this with the gravity it deserved. "Well, I think you're really brave. Fractions are hard, and I'm guessing legs are way harder." Something in Vivian's chest cracked open at that simple declaration. "Thank you, Jake. That's very kind." "You're welcome. And if you ever want to race Emma in the hallways, I bet she'd think that was cool. She's really into racing." "I'll keep that in mind." As they left, Jake chattering about whether Mustangs or Challengers were cooler, Vivian sat in the quiet office and felt something shift. She'd been so focused on the physical aspects of recovery, on neurons and muscles and nerve pathways, that she'd forgotten the rest of it. The human parts, the messy, complicated reality of building a new relationship with her own body while maintaining the relationships that made life worth living. She pulled out her phone and did something she'd been avoiding for 2 weeks. She called her longtime physician, Dr. Sarah Chen, and made an appointment for a comprehensive neurological evaluation. "I need you to retest me," Vivian said when Dr. Chen's assistant asked about the nature of the visit. "Complete workup. I have reason to believe my diagnosis might need revision." There was a pause on the other end, the sound of typing. "Dr. Chen will want to know what's changed. Tell her I'm experiencing sensory feedback and possible motor recruitment below the injury site. And tell her—" Vivian hesitated, then pushed forward. "Tell her I need her to approach this with an open mind." The appointment was scheduled for the following week. 5 days of continued sessions with Ethan, 5 days of gradual, incremental progress that felt both glacial and revolutionary. By Friday, she could reliably detect light touch on both legs, could generate visible muscle contractions in 3 different muscle groups, and could sense temperature changes with reasonable accuracy. It wasn't walking. It wasn't even close to walking. But it was more than she'd had in a decade, and it was enough to build on. "How do you feel about Monday?" Ethan asked at the end of Friday's session. "With the doctor appointment coming up?" "Terrified," Vivian admitted. "What if she runs the tests and tells me this is all just residual nerve activity or something? Not real recovery, just random signals?" "Then you'll have information you didn't have before, and you'll decide what to do with that information." Ethan leaned against the desk, his posture relaxed but his eyes serious. "But Vivian, whatever she says, remember, you felt what you felt. You moved what you moved. Medical terminology doesn't change the reality of what's happening in your body. But it changes what I can expect, what's realistic to hope for. Maybe. Or maybe the medical model just hasn't caught up with what your body already knows." He shrugged. "I'm not saying ignore professional advice. I'm saying don't let professional caution talk you out of trusting your own experience." Monday arrived with the weight of a reckoning. Vivian dressed carefully, professional but not performative, comfortable but not casual. She transferred into the Mustang, drove to Dr. Chen's office in the medical complex downtown, and checked in with a receptionist who'd seen her enough times over the years to greet her by name. "Vivian, good to see you. Dr. Chen is looking forward to catching up." The examining room felt both familiar and foreign, the same table she'd sat beside countless times, the same posters about spinal cord anatomy, the same faint smell of antiseptic and floor wax. But she was different now, coming in with questions instead of resignation. Dr. Chen entered with her usual brisk efficiency, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. She'd been Vivian's neurologist for 8 years, had overseen her care through multiple complications and adjustments, and had always been kind without being soft. "Vivian," she said, sitting down and pulling up the chart on her tablet, "your message was intriguing. Tell me what's been happening." So Vivian told her about the mechanic who'd been at her accident, about the sessions, about the sensations and movements that shouldn't exist according to her diagnosis. She kept her voice level, presenting it as data rather than hope, but Dr. Chen's expression grew increasingly concerned. "Vivian, I want to be very clear about something," Dr. Chen said when she finished. "What you're describing could be several things. It could be incomplete injury that we missed in the original assessment, possible, though unlikely given the thoroughness of your initial workup. It could be neuroplasticity creating new pathways around the injury, or it could be psychosomatic response, wishful thinking, manifesting as perceived sensation. I know the difference between imagination and actual feeling. I'm not suggesting you're making it up, but the mind is powerful, and when we want something badly enough, it can create very convincing perceptions. That's why we need objective testing." The testing took 3 hours. Electromyography to measure muscle electrical activity. Nerve conduction studies. Updated MRI imaging. Sensory testing with instruments instead of Ethan's hands. Motor testing with precise measurements instead of his observations. By the end of it, Vivian was exhausted and Dr. Chen was frowning at her tablet. Well? Vivian demanded. What do the tests show? Dr. Chen looked up, her expression carefully neutral, the kind of neutrality that doctors used when they were about to deliver news they knew the patient wouldn't want to hear. There's definitely something happening, she said slowly. Your EMG shows muscle recruitment that wasn't present in your tests from 2 years ago. Faint, inconsistent, but measurable. The nerve conduction studies show intact pathways in areas we'd previously classified as non-functional. Vivian's heart leaped. So I was right. The injury isn't complete. The injury, Doctor. Chen paused, choosing her words with visible care. May not be as complete as we originally thought. But Vivian, I need you to understand what this means and what it doesn't mean. The changes you're seeing are minimal. We're talking about going from 0 function to perhaps 5%, maybe 10 if you're very lucky and work very hard. That's more than I had yesterday. It is, but it's not the recovery you're hoping for. These kinds of incomplete injuries can show improvement with intensive therapy, but the ceiling is usually much lower than people expect. You're not going to walk out of here next month. You might not ever walk independently again. The words landed like stones, heavy and cold. Vivian had known this was possible, had tried to brace herself for exactly this scenario. But hearing it spoken aloud by someone she trusted, backed by objective data, made it real in a way that fear never had. What if I keep working? She asked, hating how her voice wavered. What if I do intensive physical therapy, push the boundaries, see what's actually possible? Then you might gain more function, or you might plateau at this level, or, and I'm sorry to be blunt, you might discover that the effort required to maintain these small gains isn't worth the toll it takes on the rest of your life. Dr. Chen leaned forward, her expression softening. Vivian, you've built an incredible life for yourself. You're successful, independent, thriving in every way that matters. Is it worth potentially disrupting all of that to chase marginal improvements in motor function? It was the same argument Vivian had heard variations of for 10 years. Focus on what you can do. Accept your limitations. Don't waste energy fighting battles you can't win. The logic was sound, the advice well-intentioned, and Vivian was so tired of it. What if it's not marginal? She said quietly. What if these small improvements lead to bigger ones? What if the only reason we think the ceiling is low is because nobody's been willing to really test it? That's not how spinal cord injuries work. There are biological limits that we discover by trying, not by assuming. Vivian straightened, feeling the steel return to her spine, the metaphorical one at least. Dr. Chen, I appreciate your concern. I do. But I need you to write me a referral for intensive physical therapy, real therapy, not maintenance. And I need you to approach my case as if recovery is possible, not as if I'm grasping at false hope. Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed, the sound carrying years of medical pragmatism confronting stubborn patient determination. I'll write the referral, she said, but I'm also going to be monitoring you closely. If I see this pursuit affecting your mental health, your physical well-being, or your quality of life, we're having another conversation. Deal. Deal. Vivian left the office with a referral to a physical therapy specialist, updated test results that proved she wasn't imagining things, and a strange mixture of validation and frustration churning in her chest. She'd been right about the incomplete injury, but the medical establishment's low expectations felt like a ceiling she'd have to break through rather than a guideline she could follow. She drove to Cole's Auto Repair without planning to, found herself in the parking lot before she'd consciously decided that's where she needed to be. The garage was still open, the sound of power tools echoing from inside. She could see Ethan through the open bay door, working on a truck's suspension, his movements efficient and sure. He looked up when her wheelchair's motor hummed into the shop, wiped his hands, and read her expression with unnerving accuracy. The doctor gave you the "be realistic" speech, he said. How did you know? Because that's what doctors do. They manage expectations based on statistical probability, which is smart medicine but terrible psychology. He pulled up a rolling stool and sat so they were eye level. What did the tests actually show? Muscle recruitment, nerve pathways that shouldn't work but apparently do, evidence that my injury is incomplete. She paused. Also a ceiling on what I should expect to recover. 5% function. Maybe 10. And what do you want? The question was simple, direct, and it cut through all the medical jargon and careful prognoses to the heart of things. I want to stand, Vivian said, the words raw with honesty. I want to know what it feels like to look someone in the eye without craning my neck. I want to reach the top shelf in my kitchen without modifications. I want... Her voice broke slightly. I want to know if I gave up too soon. Ethan nodded slowly. Then we keep going. But on your terms, for your reasons. Not to prove anything to anyone else. Just to find out what's actually true. Dr. Chen thinks I'm chasing false hope. Maybe you are. But maybe hope isn't false just because it's difficult. And maybe the real false thing is assuming we know the limits before we test them. Vivian looked at this man who'd inserted himself into her life with a secret and a question, who'd given her permission to try when everyone else had been giving her permission to quit. She thought about Jake and his innocent observation that trying was brave. She thought about the red pendant that had survived the crash in a decade in a cardboard box. And she thought about the 5% that Dr. Chen had quantified, and all the unmeasured possibilities that might exist beyond the numbers. Same time tomorrow? She asked. Ethan smiled, the expression carrying equal parts determination and understanding. Same time tomorrow, and every day after that for as long as you need. It wasn't a promise of recovery. It wasn't even a promise of significant progress. But it was a promise to keep asking the questions, to keep testing the boundaries, to keep believing that trying mattered even when the outcome was uncertain. And for now, that was enough. The physical therapy specialist Dr. Chen referred her to was named Marcus Webb, and he had the build of someone who'd spent significant time as an athlete before age, and wisdom redirected his energy into helping others. His clinic occupied the second floor of a converted warehouse, all exposed brick and industrial windows that flooded the space with natural light. The equipment was state-of-the-art, the kind of setup that cost serious money and delivered serious results. Marcus met Vivian at her first appointment with a handshake that was firm without being performative, and eyes that assessed her with the kind of professional curiosity she recognized from her own business dealings. Someone looking at a complex problem and already thinking 3 steps ahead. Dr. Chen sent me your files, he said, gesturing her toward his office. Interesting case. T10 incomplete, delayed presentation of residual function, patient-initiated investigation. How long have you been working with this mechanic she mentioned? About a month now. Vivian followed him into the office, noting the diplomas on the wall, the photos of patients at various stages of recovery, the well-worn copy of a neuroscience textbook on his desk. He's not a medical professional, but he's been effective. Effective how? I went from believing I had 0 sensation and 0 motor control below my waist to having measurable muscle recruitment and sensory feedback. So however you want to quantify that. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression that was hard to read. Let me ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Are you here because you want professional guidance, or are you here because Dr. Chen insisted and you're humoring her? The bluntness caught Vivian off guard, but she appreciated it. Both, if I'm being honest. I don't think Dr. Chen is wrong about needing proper therapy, but I also don't think she's right about the ceiling being as low as she claims. Fair enough. So here's how I work. I don't sell miracles, I don't make promises I can't keep, and I don't let patients destroy themselves chasing outcomes that aren't realistic. But I also don't assume we know your ceiling until we test it. The body's capacity for adaptation and recovery can surprise even experienced clinicians. So we're going to work hard, measure everything, and see what's actually possible. Sound good? Sounds perfect. Good. Now get out of that chair and let's see what you can actually do. The command was delivered so matter-of-factly that Vivian almost complied before her brain caught up. I can't just get out of the chair. Can't or haven't tried recently? Marcus was already moving toward the therapy mats, clearly expecting her to follow. Because, according to your files, you've got some motor recruitment happening. Let's find out what that translates to in practical terms. What followed was 2 hours of the most intense physical work Vivian had done in a decade. Marcus had her transferred to a therapy table, then systematically tested every muscle group from her hips down. Some responded. Most didn't. But the ones that did, The slight contraction in her right quadriceps, the flicker of response in her left hip flexor, the sustained engagement in her core muscles, those he cataloged with the precision of a scientist and the enthusiasm of a coach who just spotted untapped potential. "Okay," he said finally, making notes on his tablet. "Here's what I'm seeing. You've got partial innervation in several key muscle groups. It's not symmetric, it's not consistent, and it's definitely not enough for independent ambulation yet. But the foundation is there. The question is whether we can build on it." "Yet?" Vivian repeated, catching the word. "You said yet." "I did, because I've seen stranger things happen with dedicated work. But Vivian, I need you to understand the reality here. Even if we achieve the best-case scenario, you're looking at assisted ambulation at most. Braces, walker, maybe eventually a cane for short distances. You're probably never going to be running marathons or ditching the wheelchair entirely. It's a tool you're going to need for the rest of your life, regardless of what else we achieve." "I know, but assisted ambulation is more than I had yesterday." Marcus nodded, something approving in his expression. "Good attitude. All right, here's the plan. We meet 3 times a week, 90-minute sessions. I'm going to work on strengthening what you have, improving consistency in recruitment, and teaching your nervous system new pathways around the injury. It's going to be hard, it's going to be frustrating, and some days you're going to hate me. But if you stick with it, we'll see progress." "What about the work I've been doing with Ethan?" "The mechanic?" Marcus considered. "If it's been working for you, I'd say keep it up. Different perspectives can be valuable, and if he's helping you tune into your body's signals, that's not something I can replicate in a clinical setting. Just make sure you're not overworking. Recovery requires rest as much as effort." Vivian left that first session exhausted, sore, and more hopeful than she'd allowed herself to be in weeks. Marcus didn't promise miracles, but he also didn't dismiss possibilities. He saw the same data Dr. Chen had seen and reached a different conclusion. Not that Vivian should be grateful for 5%, but that 5% might be a starting point rather than a destination. She went straight to Cole's auto repair from the clinic, found Ethan finishing up with a customer. He waved her into the office and joined her a few minutes later, his work shirt stained with fresh grease, his expression openly curious. "How'd it go with the specialist?" "He told me I'm probably never going to run marathons, but that assisted ambulation might be achievable with dedicated work." Vivian found herself smiling despite the exhaustion. "Then he spent 2 hours putting me through tests that made our sessions feel gentle." "That good, huh?" "That thorough. He wants me 3 times a week, which means between his sessions and ours, I'm going to be spending a significant portion of my life focused on nerve pathways and muscle recruitment." Ethan pulled up the rolling stool, his movements easy and unselfconscious. "You sure that's sustainable? That's a lot of energy to dedicate to something with uncertain outcomes." "Is it?" Vivian met his gaze squarely. "You spend your days fixing cars that might break down again. You're raising a son who might grow up to resent you or make mistakes or break your heart. You dedicated a decade to carrying guilt about an accident that wasn't your fault. We all spend energy on uncertain outcomes. At least this one is mine to choose." Something shifted in Ethan's expression, a recognition of truth that went beyond the immediate conversation. "Fair point, so we keep going. We keep going, but I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." "Okay. Why are you really doing this? And don't tell me it's guilt about that night. That might have been the catalyst, but you've invested too much time and care for this to just be about absolving yourself." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the window where the late afternoon sun slanted through dust motes and oil haze. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested he was excavating truth from someplace deep. "When Jake's mom left," he said slowly, "he was 2 years old. Just started talking in full sentences, just beginning to really be a person instead of a tiny dictator in diapers. And she walked out because being a parent was harder than she expected, and I wasn't successful enough to make up for the difficulty. Just packed her stuff one Tuesday afternoon while I was at work and left a note saying she needed to find herself." Vivian stayed quiet, sensing there was more. "For months after that, I second-guessed everything. Every decision I made about Jake, every moment I spent working instead of with him, every time he cried and I didn't know how to fix it, I kept thinking about all the ways I was failing him just by not being enough. And then one day, Lisa found me sitting in my truck at 2 in the morning, Jake asleep in his car seat because I couldn't figure out how to get him to sleep in his crib, and she said something that stuck with me. What did she say? She said the only way to truly fail him was to stop trying. That being enough didn't mean being perfect. It meant showing up, paying attention, and giving a damn even when it was hard. Ethan looked back at Vivian. You asked why I'm doing this. I'm doing it because you deserved someone to show up 10 years ago and really pay attention to what was happening. You deserved someone to give a damn about whether the diagnosis was right or just convenient. And since I can't go back and be that person then, maybe I can be that person now. The honesty in his voice created a kind of intimacy that had nothing to do with physical proximity and everything to do with shared understanding. Vivian felt something in her chest loosen, a knot she hadn't known she was carrying. Thank you, she said quietly, for showing up. Thank you for letting me. They worked together for another 40 minutes that day, the session taking on a different quality now that the underlying motivations were named and acknowledged. Ethan guided her through gentle resistance exercises, his hands providing feedback and support, while she tried to recruit muscles that were still learning to respond. The progress was minimal, a few extra seconds of sustained contraction, slightly better control over the muscle engagement, but it felt significant in ways that transcended measurement. When they finished, Vivian stayed in the office while Ethan went to lock up the garage. Through the window, she could see him moving through the space with practiced efficiency, shutting off lights, checking locks, tidying the perpetual chaos of tools and parts. It was the choreography of someone who'd performed these same actions thousands of times, who'd built a life from routine and responsibility and small acts of care that added up to something meaningful. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. Board meeting moved to Thursday. Also, the Henderson contract needs your signature by tomorrow. Reality reasserted itself with the efficiency of a well-executed business operation. She'd been so focused on nerve pathways and muscle recruitment that she'd almost forgotten she had a company to run, a business that didn't pause just because she was chasing physical recovery. She spent that evening in her home office, reviewing contracts and financial projections with the same focused intensity she brought to physical therapy. The work was familiar, comfortable in the way that expertise always was. She could read a balance sheet faster than most people could read a text message, could spot problematic contract language from 3 paragraphs away, could project quarterly earnings with accuracy that made her CFO nervous about being replaced by her intuition. But underneath the competence, underneath the practiced ease of doing what she was good at, was a new awareness. She'd spent 10 years building this life, this version of herself that was defined by what she could control and master from a seated position. And it was a good life, a successful life, a life that most people would envy. The question that kept nagging at her was whether it was the life she would have chosen if she'd known there were other options. Her phone rang just after 11. Marcus Webb, according to the caller ID. She answered with the slight apprehension that came from medical professionals calling outside business hours. Vivian, sorry for the late call. I was reviewing your test results and I wanted to discuss something before our next session. What is it? I want to try electrical stimulation therapy. We use it to help retrain neural pathways, strengthen muscle response, potentially improve the consistency of what you're already achieving. It's not invasive, but it is intense, and I wanted to make sure you're comfortable with adding another component to the treatment plan. Will it help? In cases like yours, it can accelerate progress. No guarantees, but the research is promising. I've got openings if you want to add a 4th session each week. Vivian looked at her calendar, already crowded with business meetings, therapy sessions, and the daily sessions with Ethan. Adding another 90 minutes would mean restructuring her entire schedule, delegating more at work, accepting that recovery was going to consume even more of her life. Do it, she said. Send me the available times and I'll make it work. You're sure? That's a significant commitment. I'm sure. If there's even a chance it helps, I want to try it. After she hung up, Vivian sat in the quiet of her home office and let herself feel the full weight of the choice she was making. She was all in now, committed to a path that might lead to marginal improvements or might lead nowhere at all. She was risking comfort, risking the equilibrium she'd spent a decade building, risking the very real possibility of devastating disappointment. And she was doing it anyway, because the alternative, spending the rest of her life wondering what might have been possible, felt like a different kind of paralysis. The next 2 weeks blurred together in a relentless cycle of therapy, work, and incremental progress. Marcus's sessions were systematic and demanding, breaking down movement into component parts and rebuilding her neuromuscular connections from the ground up. The electrical stimulation therapy was exactly as intense as he'd warned, her muscles contracting under external impulse, her nervous system learning to recognize and replicate the patterns. Ethan's sessions became the counterpoint to Marcus's clinical precision, less structured, more intuitive, focused on helping her tune into the subtle signals her body was sending. He taught her to differentiate between actual sensation and phantom feeling, to recognize the difference between muscle fatigue and muscle recruitment, to push without destroying herself in the pursuit of progress. And progress came, measured in increments so small they would have been laughable if they weren't so hard-won. She could hold a muscle contraction for 30 seconds instead of 10. She could recruit her hip flexors with 70% consistency instead of 40. She could detect temperature changes with enough accuracy to pass Marcus's clinical tests. But the real breakthrough came on a Thursday afternoon in Ethan's office, during what should have been a routine session. They'd been working on weight-bearing exercises, Vivian standing in a supported frame while trying to engage her leg muscles enough to take some of her weight off her arms. It was exhausting work, the kind that left her trembling and drenched in sweat within minutes. But Ethan had a theory that actually putting her body in the position it was trying to relearn, might trigger responses that horizontal exercises couldn't access. "Okay," he said, his hand steadying her hips while she gripped the parallel bars. "Same as before. Try to straighten your right leg. Push through the heel. Engage the quad." Vivian focused, marshaling every ounce of concentration, imagining the neural pathway lighting up like a highway at night. Push, engage, straighten, and her legs straightened. Not much, maybe 30 degrees, but it was visible, measurable, undeniable. Her knee extended, her leg bore weight, and for 3 glorious seconds before the muscle gave out, she was standing with partial support instead of full suspension. "Did you see that?" She was gasping, her voice shaking. "Tell me you saw that." "I saw it." Ethan's voice was rough with emotion. "Do it again." She tried, failed, tried again. The third attempt yielded another 2 seconds of extension, the muscle trembling with effort but holding. By the 5th attempt, she was crying and laughing at the same time, her whole body shaking with exhaustion and exhilaration. "That's enough," Ethan said gently, helping her back to the wheelchair. "That's more than enough for today." I stood. Partially. But I stood. "You did. And tomorrow you'll do it again, and the day after that, until it's not a miracle anymore. Until it's just something your body knows how to do." Vivian sat in the wheelchair, her legs trembling from the effort, her heart hammering in her chest. She felt split open, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with physical exposure and everything to do with the terrifying fragility of hope realized. "I need to tell you something," she said, the words coming out before she could second-guess them. "When I first came here, I thought you were either crazy or running some kind of con. I couldn't imagine why a mechanic would care about whether I could stand, and I definitely couldn't imagine that you'd be right. And now? Now I think you might be the first person in 10 years who looked at me and saw possibility instead of limitation. And I don't know how to thank you for that." Ethan shook his head slowly. "You don't thank me. You keep showing up, keep doing the work, keep proving that everyone who told you to settle was wrong. That's all the thanks I need." "It's not enough. It's everything." They sat in the quiet office, the late afternoon sun painting long shadows across the floor, the distant sound of traffic providing a mundane soundtrack to a moment that felt anything but mundane. Vivian thought about all the sessions that had led to this one, all the small failures and incremental successes, all the times she'd wanted to quit, and all the reasons she'd found to keep going. And she thought about the life she'd built, the company, the accomplishments, the carefully constructed independence, and how it was all still there, still valid, still hers. Recovery didn't erase what she'd created. It just added options. Marcus wants to try me with leg braces, she said, breaking the silence. Next week. He thinks if we can provide external support, I might be able to do more with the muscle recruitment I've achieved. How do you feel about that? Terrified. Excited. Both. Vivian looked at her legs, these parts of her body that had been passengers for so long and were now tentatively rejoining the conversation. What if I get the braces and I still can't walk? What if this is the ceiling, standing with support for a few seconds at a time? Then you'll know, and you'll decide if that's enough or if you want to keep pushing. But Vivian, whatever happens, you've already achieved something most people said was impossible. You've gone from complete paralysis to voluntary motor control. That's not nothing. It's not walking. Not yet. But it's more than you had. And it's proof that the ceiling everyone assumed existed was built on incomplete information. Ethan leaned forward, his expression serious. I'm not going to lie to you and say I know you'll walk again. I don't. Nobody does. But I know you're stubborn enough to find out what's actually possible instead of accepting what people assume is possible. And I know that counts for something. Vivian reached out and squeezed his hand briefly, a gesture of gratitude and connection that felt both natural and significant. Same time tomorrow? Same time tomorrow. And every day after that, for as long as you need. She left the garage that evening feeling like she was carrying something precious and fragile. Not hope exactly, because hope felt too passive, too much like wishing. This was more like determination crystallized into purpose. The recognition that outcomes mattered, but effort mattered more. The board meeting the next day felt like an exercise in code switching. Vivian rolled into the conference room in her power wheelchair, impeccably dressed, her presentation materials loaded and ready. She fielded questions about quarterly projections, defended strategic decisions, pushed back on a proposed acquisition that didn't align with company values. She was sharp, competent, commanding, every inch the CEO who'd built this company from an idea and a laptop into a multi-million-dollar operation. And underneath it all, her legs were trembling from yesterday's breakthrough, her muscles sore from therapy, her mind half occupied with thoughts of leg braces and weight-bearing exercises, and the terrifying possibility of standing on her own. Vivian? Her CFO, Robert Chen, was looking at her with concern. You okay? You seem distracted. I'm fine. Just a lot on my plate. She refocused, pulling herself back into the moment. Let's talk about the Henderson contract. I've reviewed the terms and I have concerns about the liability clauses. The meeting continued, business proceeding with the inexorable momentum of a successful company. But when it ended and the executives filed out, Robert lingered. Seriously, are you okay? You've been different lately. Not bad different, just different, like you're thinking about something else. Vivian considered deflecting, maintaining the professional distance she'd always carefully preserved. But Robert had been with her for 6 years, had seen her through product launches and market crashes and personnel crises. He'd earned some honesty. I'm working on something personal, she said carefully. Physical therapy, trying to see if I can regain some function that everyone assumed was gone permanently. Robert's eyebrows rose. And it's working. Slowly, incrementally, but working. I'm not going to dance at the company holiday party or anything, but I'm achieving things my doctors said were impossible. That's incredible, Vivian, but also, he hesitated. Be careful, okay? I've seen you pour yourself into challenges before. You're relentless when you want something. Just make sure you're not sacrificing your actual life for the possibility of a different one. It was the same concern Lisa had voiced to Ethan, the same warning Dr. Chen had delivered with clinical precision. Everyone wanted to protect her from disappointment, from pushing too hard, from wanting too much. I appreciate the concern, Vivian said evenly. But this is my choice to make, and I'm making it with full awareness of the risks. Robert nodded slowly. Fair enough. Just know that this company needs you, exactly as you are. Whatever you achieve or don't achieve physically, it doesn't change your value here. You know that, right? I do, but that's not why I'm doing this. Why are you doing it? Vivian thought about Ethan's question about the last time someone had asked her to stand, about Jake's simple observation that trying was brave, about the 3 seconds of weight-bearing that had felt like flying. Because I deserve to know what's true, she said finally. Not what's convenient or what's safe or what fits into everyone's expectations. Just what's actually objectively true about what my body can do. And the only way to find that out is to try. Then I hope you find it. Robert stood, gathering his materials. And for what it's worth, watching you chase this with the same intensity you bring to business, it's inspiring. Terrifying, but inspiring. After he left, Vivian sat alone in the conference room and let herself feel the full complexity of what she was attempting. She was trying to hold multiple truths simultaneously, that she was valuable and complete exactly as she was, and that she deserved to explore what else might be possible. That her wheelchair was a tool that gave her freedom, and that she wanted the freedom to sometimes not need it. That acceptance and ambition weren't mutually exclusive, even when everyone treated them like opposing forces. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. Jake wants to know if you're coming to his school's science fair next week. Fair warning, his volcano is more enthusiasm than accuracy. The invitation was casual, the kind of thing friends did for each other, but it represented a shift in their relationship, an acknowledgement that they'd moved beyond patient and helper into something more nuanced. She'd become part of the small constellation of people in Ethan and Jake's life, just as they'd become part of hers. She typed back, I'll be there. Does he need help with the presentation? He needs help not getting overexcited and explaining the entire periodic table when people just want to see the eruption. But that's probably beyond even your skills. Vivian smiled, feeling the warmth of inclusion, of being seen as a person rather than a project. I'll do my best. What time? The science fair was on Wednesday evening, which meant rearranging a dinner meeting and leaving work early. Vivian arrived at the elementary school to find the gymnasium transformed into a chaos of poster boards and experiments, children in their best approximations of formal wear, showing off projects ranging from sophisticated to adorably misguided. She found Jake's booth easily. It was the one with the papier-mâché volcano that was slightly lopsided and painted in colors that didn't exist in nature. Ethan stood beside his son, looking proud and amused in equal measure. Ms. Hale! Jake's face lit up when he saw her. You came! Do you want to see my volcano? It's about how pressure builds up inside the earth and then explodes with lava and gases and sometimes rocks. I absolutely want to see it, Vivian said, rolling closer. For the next 20 minutes, she listened to Jake's enthusiastic, if scientifically questionable explanation of volcanic activity, watched the baking soda and vinegar eruption with appropriate awe, and answered questions about whether she'd ever seen a real volcano. Around them, other parents and students milled through the gym, the air filled with the particular energy of children sharing something they'd worked hard on. And Vivian realized, with a clarity that felt like revelation, that this was part of what she'd been missing. Not standing, not walking, though those mattered too, but this, community, connection. The messy, unpolished reality of being part of other people's lives in ways that had nothing to do with business transactions or medical appointments. She'd spent 10 years building walls that protected her from pity and ensured her independence. But walls that kept people from seeing her as diminished also kept them from seeing her as human, as someone who could be trusted with a 7-year-old's volcano demonstration, as someone worth including in the small, ordinary moments that made up a life. Later, after the fair ended and Jake had been congratulated by his teacher and promised ice cream for his efforts, Ethan walked Vivian to her car. Thanks for coming, he said. It meant a lot to Jake, to both of us. Thank you for inviting me. I didn't realize how much I'd isolated myself until tonight. You didn't isolate yourself. You protected yourself. There's a difference. Maybe, but I think I'm ready to stop protecting quite so hard. Vivian looked up at him, at this man who'd become unexpectedly central to her life. The leg braces arrive on Monday. Marcus wants to do a fitting and initial trial. I'm terrified. Of failing? Of succeeding? Of actually being able to stand and then having to figure out what that means for everything else. For how I see myself. For how other people see me. Ethan was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful in the parking lot's fluorescent light. You know what I tell Jake when he's scared of something changing? I tell him that growing doesn't mean leaving behind who you were. It just means adding to it. You're always going to be the person who built a company from a wheelchair. Adding, and sometimes I stand, doesn't erase that. It just makes the story bigger. When did you get so wise? Single parenting. It's either get wise or drown in laundry and existential questions about why the sky is blue. He smiled, the expression carrying warmth and something else that Vivian was afraid to name. You're going to do great on Monday. And whatever happens, whatever you achieve or don't achieve, it doesn't change the fact that you're already remarkable. Vivian drove home with those words wrapped around her like armor, like comfort, like the kind of support that didn't require parallel bars or medical equipment. Just faith, just presence, just someone choosing to show up and pay attention. Monday arrived with the weight of a threshold. The leg braces Marcus had ordered were custom-made, designed to provide support where her muscles were still weak while allowing movement where she had control. They looked like something between medical equipment and science fiction. Lightweight carbon fiber, precisely calibrated hinges, padding in all the crucial spots. These are going to feel weird at first, Marcus warned as he fitted them over her legs. Your body's not used to the support, and we're asking it to do things it hasn't done in a decade. Take it slow. The process of standing with the braces was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Marcus and his assistant supported her on either side, while she focused on engaging every muscle fiber she'd spent months learning to recruit. The braces held her legs straight, providing structure where her muscles couldn't yet maintain it consistently. And then she was upright. Actually, genuinely upright. Her feet flat on the ground, her spine straight, her head level with Marcus's shoulder instead of his waist. Oh my. She couldn't finish the sentence. The perspective shift was overwhelming. The room looked different from this angle. Her body felt different arranged vertically instead of seated. Marcus's face was right there, level with hers, and she could see the top of his assistant's head for the first time. How do you feel? Marcus asked, his voice calm despite the magnitude of the moment. Tall, Vivian said, and then she laughed, the sound breaking free from someplace deep and unguarded. I feel impossibly tall. You're 5'7". That's actually average. I know, but I haven't been 5'7" in 10 years. I've been 3'8" plus wheels. The tears started then, not sad or frustrated, but overwhelmed. How long can I stand like this? Let's find out. Tell me when your muscles start fatiguing or when you need to sit. She lasted 4 minutes the first time. 4 minutes of standing with support, her legs trembling with effort, her core muscles screaming from the unfamiliar position. But when Marcus finally helped her back to the wheelchair, Vivian felt like she'd climbed a mountain. That's excellent for a first attempt, Marcus said, already making notes. We'll build from here. Longer duration, less support, eventually working towards steps. Steps, Vivian repeated, the word tasting like possibility and terror. As in walking? As in weight shifting and controlled movement while standing. It's a long way from here to independent ambulation, but yes, that's the direction we're heading. She left the clinic that day with the leg braces in a carrying case, a detailed exercise plan, and instructions to practice standing with support at home. She also left with a new understanding of what recovery meant. Not a straight line from limitation to ability, but a gradual expansion of options, a slow accumulation of small victories that added up to something larger. That evening, she stood in her living room with the braces on, gripping the kitchen counter for support, and looked at her reflection in the darkened window. The woman looking back was familiar, but transformed. Same face, same determined expression, but arranged in a configuration she'd almost forgotten. Upright. Meeting the world at eye level, taking up vertical space. She stood there until her muscles gave out, until she had to transfer back to the wheelchair with shaking arms and burning legs. And as she sat there, catching her breath and feeling the aftermath of effort in every fiber, Vivian understood something fundamental. This wasn't about walking. It had never been about walking. It was about reclaiming agency over her own story, about refusing to accept someone else's definition of possible, about standing, literally and metaphorically, in the truth of who she was and who she was becoming. And that, she thought, as she wheeled toward her bedroom to rest before tomorrow's session with Ethan, was worth every trembling muscle and every terrified moment. Worth everything. The next morning, Vivian showed up at Cole's Auto Repair with the leg braces in her carrying case and an expression that Ethan had learned to recognize as equal parts determination and barely controlled anxiety. "Marcus fitted you yesterday," he said, not quite a question. "He did. I stood for 4 minutes." She said it casually, but her hands were gripping the wheelchair armrests with white-knuckled intensity. Ethan set down the wrench he'd been holding and gave her his full attention. 4 minutes is significant. How did it feel? Terrifying, incredible, like remembering something I'd forgotten I knew how to do. Vivian paused, seeming to gather herself. "I want to try it here, with you. I need to know if I can do it without Marcus and his assistant on either side of me." "You brought the braces?" She patted the carrying case on her lap. "I did. And I know this isn't what we usually do in our sessions, but it's exactly what we should do," Ethan interrupted. "Let me close up the bay and we'll use the office. More privacy, and the desk is sturdy enough to use for support if you need it." 20 minutes later, Vivian sat in the office with the braces fitted over her legs, their carbon fiber structure transforming the shape of her body into something that looked ready for movement. Ethan had positioned himself within arm's reach but not hovering, giving her space while remaining close enough to help if needed. "Okay," she said, her voice steadier than her hands. "Same as with Marcus. I transfer to standing, use the desk for support, and see what happens." "I'm right here. Take your time." The transfer itself was something she'd practiced 100 times in different contexts, from wheelchair to car to bed to therapy table. But this was different. This time she was transferring with the intention of staying vertical, of asking her body to hold a position it had abandoned a decade ago. She gripped the desk edge, engaged her core, and pushed up. The braces held her legs straight, her feet found the floor, and then she was standing, actually standing, her heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her throat. "You're doing it," Ethan said quietly. "You're standing." "I am." The words came out breathless. "But I don't know if I'm actually bearing weight or if the braces are doing all the work." "Try shifting your weight slightly to the right. Feel what engages." Vivian focused, attempting the subtle weight transfer. Her right leg responded, not perfectly, not smoothly, but responded. She could feel the muscles firing, the brace supporting what they couldn't yet do alone, the collaboration between external structure and internal effort. "I feel it. My quad is working. The brace is helping, but the muscle is actually engaged." "Good. Now try the left." The left side was weaker, the response more inconsistent, but it was there. A flicker of voluntary control buried beneath years of disuse. She stood there for 3 minutes, then 4, then 5, her breathing growing labored with the effort of maintaining the position. "I need to sit," she said finally, her voice tight with fatigue. Ethan helped guide her back to the wheelchair, his hands steady and sure. When she was seated again, trembling from exertion, he grabbed a bottle of water from the small refrigerator in the corner and handed it to her. 5 minutes, he said. "That's longer than yesterday." "Barely, and I was holding on to the desk the entire time." "So? You were standing, under your own power, with support, yes, but your muscles were engaged. That's what matters." Ethan pulled up the rolling stool, sitting so they were eye level again. "Vivian, I need you to stop measuring yourself against some imaginary standard of what recovery should look like. You're rewriting the entire narrative of what's possible for your body. That takes time. Everyone keeps telling me to be patient. Marcus says it. Dr. Chen says it. You say it. But I've been patient for 10 years. I've been accepting and adaptive and all the things you're supposed to be. And now that I finally have permission to try for something more, everyone wants me to slow down. That's not what I'm saying. Try as hard as you want, push as far as you can. But don't mistake progress for failure just because it's incremental. 5 minutes of standing today might not feel like enough, but it's the foundation for 10 minutes next week, 20 minutes next month. You can't skip the foundation and expect the building to stand. Vivian drained half the water bottle, using the moment to collect herself. Sorry, I'm not usually this frustrated with process. In business, I'm good at long-term strategy, at understanding that sustainable growth takes time, but this feels different. Because it's personal, because it's your body and your life, and all the years you think you lost. Ethan's voice was gentle but firm. But those years weren't lost, Vivian. You built a company. You became successful on your own terms. You learned to navigate a world that wasn't designed for you, and you did it with grace and competence. That's not nothing just because you're achieving something else now. Robert said something similar, that I'm valuable exactly as I am, that physical recovery doesn't change that. He's right. I know he is. Intellectually, I know that. But there's this part of me that keeps thinking if I could walk, if I could stand independently, then all those years in the wheelchair would have been wasted, like I should have been fighting this whole time instead of adapting. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of hard-won understanding. After Jake's mom left, I spent months thinking I should have seen it coming, should have fought harder to make her stay, should have been more successful, or more attentive, or more something. And Lisa finally sat me down and said, "You can't revise the past with information you only have now. You made the best decisions you could with what you knew then. That's all anyone can do." And did that help? Eventually, once I stopped beating myself up long enough to hear it. He met her gaze steadily. "You adapted 10 years ago because that's what the medical evidence suggested was necessary. You built a life based on the best information available to you. That wasn't giving up. That was survival. And now you have new information, so you're making different choices. Both can be true. Both can be the right decision for the moment you were in." Vivian felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of guilt and regret that she'd been carrying without fully acknowledging it. "Thank you. I needed to hear that. Anytime. Now, you want to rest or do you want to try standing again in 20 minutes? She smiled despite the exhaustion. 20 minutes. But first I need to ask you something. How's Jake handling all of this? Me being around so much, taking up your time and attention? He likes you, asks about you between sessions, wants to know if you're getting better. Ethan's expression softened. He told me the other day that when he grows up, he wants to be either a mechanic like me or an engineer who makes wheelchairs that can fly. I asked him why wheelchairs specifically, and he said because then people like you and Emma could go anywhere they wanted without stairs being a problem. That's the sweetest thing I've heard in years. He's a good kid, better than I probably deserve. Ethan glanced toward the garage, where they could hear the distant sound of someone pulling into the parking lot. I should check who that is. You good here for a minute? I'm good. Ethan left to handle the customer, and Vivian sat alone in the quiet office, her legs still encased in the braces, her body still trembling slightly from the effort of standing. She thought about Jake's flying wheelchairs and Ethan's patient support, and the strange, unexpected community she'd found in this unlikely place. Her phone buzzed with an email from her assistant. Reminder, investor presentation next Tuesday. Also, the Tech Journal wants to interview you about the new AI implementation. Should I schedule it? The business world continued its relentless forward motion, indifferent to her personal journey. She typed back quickly. Schedule the interview for next Thursday afternoon, and make sure the presentation deck highlights the efficiency improvements, not just the cost savings. Investors care about both. When Ethan returned 15 minutes later, Vivian was ready to try again. The second standing session that day lasted 6 minutes, and by the end of it, she managed to lift her right foot slightly off the ground. Not a step, not even close, but a weight shift significant enough to prove that bilateral support wasn't absolutely necessary. "Did you see that?" she demanded, breathing hard. "I saw it. Your left leg held your weight while you lifted the right. That's major, Vivian. It was barely 2 seconds. It was 2 seconds longer than yesterday. Stop discounting your own progress." She laughed, the sound edged with exhaustion and exhilaration. "You're relentless about making me celebrate small victories." Someone has to be. You're too busy cataloging what you haven't achieved yet to notice what you're accomplishing now. The pattern continued over the following weeks. Sessions with Marcus 3 times a week, focused on building strength and endurance. Daily sessions with Ethan, focused on integration and practical application. Hours of practice at home, standing at her kitchen counter while making dinner, standing in her closet while choosing clothes, standing because she could, and because each moment vertical was a small reclamation of territory she'd thought permanently lost. The progress was maddeningly slow and undeniably real. 7 minutes of standing became 10, then 15. Weight shifts became more controlled, more deliberate. The braces remained necessary, but she needed less support from furniture or walls to maintain her balance. And then, 5 weeks after the braces arrived, she took her first step. It happened during a session with Marcus, almost anticlimactic in its suddenness. She was standing between parallel bars, practicing weight shifts, when Marcus said, "Okay, now try moving your right foot forward, just a few inches. We'll call it a weight transfer with distance." Vivian focused, engaged every muscle she'd spent months learning to control, and shifted her weight fully onto her left leg. Then, with agonizing slowness, she lifted her right foot and moved it forward approximately 6 inches before setting it down again. The distance was absurd. A toddler could move farther, but it was forward motion while upright, and by every technical definition, it was a step. Marcus's face broke into a grin that transformed his usually professional demeanor. "That's it. That's a step. Do it again." She tried, succeeded, nearly fell, caught herself on the parallel bars. Her heart was racing, her breathing ragged, tears streaming down her face in a way that felt both cathartic and overwhelming. "I stepped. Oh my God, I actually stepped. You did, and you're going to do it again and again until it's not scary anymore. Until it's just movement." Marcus was already making notes, his clinical mind cataloging the mechanics even as he shared in the moment. "This changes the whole trajectory of your therapy. If you can step with support, we can work toward walking with a walker, eventually maybe a cane." "How long? Months? Maybe a year? Maybe longer. But Vivian, you just did something 3 different specialists said was impossible, so I'm not putting limits on what else you might achieve." She called Ethan from the parking lot, sitting in her car with the Mustang's engine idling, unable to drive yet because her hands were shaking too much. "I stepped," she said when he answered, not bothering with preamble. "What?" She could hear the smile in his voice. "At Marcus's clinic, during therapy, I took an actual step. 6 inches forward, controlled weight transfer, deliberate movement. A step." "Vivian, that's incredible. How do you feel?" "Terrified, excited, like I want to laugh and cry and possibly throw up from adrenaline." She wiped at her face with her free hand. "I wanted to tell you first, before anyone else, because none of this would have happened if you hadn't asked that question 3 months ago. You did this, not me. I just gave you permission to try. But the work, the determination, the sheer stubborn refusal to accept limitations, that's all you. Can I come by the shop? I know it's not our scheduled time, but I'll be here. Come whenever you're ready." She drove to Cole's Auto Repair with her vision blurred by tears she couldn't seem to stop, her emotions a tangled mess of triumph and grief. Because every step forward was also a reminder of time lost, of years spent not knowing this was possible, of all the moments she might have experienced differently if someone had asked the right questions sooner. Ethan was waiting in the parking lot when she arrived, Jake beside him with a gap-toothed grin and a drawing he'd apparently been working on. "Dad said you did something really cool today," Jake said as Vivian rolled closer. "I made you a picture." The drawing showed a stick figure in a wheelchair next to another stick figure standing up, with an arrow between them and the words, "You're awesome," in crayon. "Thank you, Jake. This is perfect." Vivian's voice cracked on the words. "Are you crying because you're sad?" "No, buddy. She's crying because she's happy," Ethan said gently. "Sometimes people do that." "That's confusing." "I know. Grown-ups are weird." Jake considered this, then offered Vivian a somewhat grubby hand to hold. "Well, I think you're cool, even if you cry when you're happy." The simple kindness broke something open in Vivian, and she found herself laughing through the tears, holding a 7-year-old's hand and feeling more seen than she had in years. Ethan watched them with an expression that held such tenderness it made her chest ache. Later, after Lisa arrived to pick up Jake, Ethan and Vivian sat in the office with the door closed, the fading sunlight painting the walls in shades of amber and gold. "I keep thinking about that night," Vivian said quietly. "The accident, you telling me not to move, all the what-ifs. Don't do that to yourself." "How can I not? If someone had asked different questions, if the paramedics had done different tests, If I'd pushed harder in those first months, you'd be someone else, living a different life with different experiences and different strengths. Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression serious. You want to know what I think? I think you were meant to take the path you took. Because the person you became in that wheelchair, strong, successful, uncompromising, that's who had the courage to question the diagnosis when I gave you a reason to. A different version of you, one who never adapted, who spent 10 years fighting against the wheelchair instead of building with it. Maybe that person wouldn't have had the strength to do what you're doing now. That's a generous interpretation. It's an honest one. You didn't waste 10 years, Vivian. You built a foundation, and now you're building something else on top of it. Both matter. Both count. She wanted to believe him, wanted to release the guilt that kept whispering she should have known, should have tried harder, should have demanded more answers. But guilt was a stubborn companion, not easily dismissed with logic or kindness. Tell me something, she said, changing the subject before the emotion became too much. What are you going to do when this is over? When I don't need daily sessions anymore? Ethan's expression shifted, something complicated moving behind his eyes. I haven't thought about it. Liar. You think about everything 3 steps ahead. It's how you run this place, how you parent Jake. So what happens when I'm walking with a cane and don't need a mechanic's office for therapy sessions? I guess we'll find out. His voice was carefully neutral, but Vivian heard the uncertainty underneath. But for what it's worth, I hope it doesn't mean you disappear. Jake would miss you, and... He paused. I'd miss you too. The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither seemed ready to fully explore. They'd been so focused on the work, on the therapy, on the incremental progress toward standing and stepping that they'd avoided examining what else was building in the spaces between sessions. I'd miss you too, Vivian said finally. Both of you, this place... She gestured at the shabby office with its cluttered desk and oil-stained floor. It's become important to me. Not just the therapy, the rest of it, the community, the friendship. I don't want to lose that just because the original reason for coming here changes. Then we'll figure it out, make sure it doesn't change. Ethan smiled, the expression carrying warmth and something that looked like relief. Maybe you'll discover a sudden need for frequent Mustang maintenance. The modifications have been working perfectly since you told me my problem wasn't the car. Then we'll find another reason. I'm creative when I need to be. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that only existed between people who'd spent significant time together, who'd shared vulnerable moments and difficult truths. Outside, the sounds of the city continued. Traffic, distant sirens, the ordinary soundtrack of life proceeding. Vivian's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Great session today. I've scheduled you with the orthopedic specialist next week to evaluate for advanced bracing options. If we can reduce the support needed, we might be able to work toward independent standing. Independent standing. The words felt both impossibly far away and tantalizingly close. She showed the message to Ethan, watching his face as he read. That's the goal, right? Independent standing, then walking, then eventually not needing the braces at all. That's one possible goal, but honestly, I'm not sure anymore if it's my goal. Vivian surprised herself with the admission. I've spent so long focused on walking that I haven't stopped to ask what I actually want the outcome to be. Do I want to walk? Yes. Would it be incredible to stand without braces? Absolutely. But if the best I can achieve is walking short distances with a cane while still using the wheelchair for longer trips or energy conservation, I think I'm okay with that. The wheelchair isn't my prison anymore. It's just a tool, one of several I can use depending on what I need in a given moment. That's a healthy perspective, not the one I expected 3 months ago, but healthy. 3 months ago, I was convinced the wheelchair defined me, that it was the primary fact of my existence, the thing everyone noticed first and last. She looked down at the chair, at the custom modifications she'd paid a fortune for, at the wheels that had carried her through a decade of life. But it doesn't define me. My work defines me. My choices define me. The wheelchair is just there, like glasses or a prosthetic or any other adaptive device. It's part of my life, not the sum total of who I am. When did you realize that? Honestly, Jake's science fair. I was rolling around that gym, interacting with other parents and students, and I realized nobody was focused on the wheelchair except me. They saw a person who came to support a friend's kid. That's it. The chair was just the method of transportation. She paused, remembering. There was this one mom who asked if I was Jake's aunt, and when I said no, just a family friend, she said, "Well, any friend of the Coles is welcome here." And she meant it. No pity, no awkwardness, just acceptance. People are usually better than we expect them to be, once we give them the chance. Says the man who's been giving me chances for 3 months straight. That's different. You didn't need chances, you just needed someone to stop assuming they knew your limits better than you did. Vivian's phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Robert. She answered on speaker after getting Ethan's nod of permission. "Vivian, sorry to bother you after hours, but the Henderson deal just got complicated. They're requesting additional liability coverage that wasn't in the original terms, and they want an answer by tomorrow morning." She closed her eyes briefly, her brain switching gears from personal to professional with practiced ease. What kind of coverage are they asking for? Extended warranty on the AI implementation, full system replacement if there are any failures in the first 2 years, and ongoing support that basically amounts to us staffing a dedicated team for their needs. That's not a deal anymore. That's a service contract with purchase terms. Tell them we'll do the extended warranty and reasonable support, but not a dedicated team. If they want that level of service, it comes with a different price point. I'll send you the numbers in an hour. You're the best. Sorry for interrupting your evening. It's fine. This is what I do. She ended the call and found Ethan watching her with undisguised admiration. That was impressive. You didn't even hesitate. Business negotiations I can do in my sleep. It's the personal stuff that trips me up. She started pulling up spreadsheets on her phone, her mind already calculating profit margins and support costs. I should probably head home. I've got work to do before tomorrow, and you've got Jake's bedtime routine. Vivian. Ethan waited until she looked up. The step you took today? That's going to change everything. You know that, right? I know it's progress. I'm trying not to make it mean more than that. I'm not talking about just the physical progress. I'm talking about what it proves, that you were right to question, right to try, right to push back against everyone who told you to accept limitations. That matters beyond just the walking. You think I'll take that lesson into other parts of my life? I think you already are. I think you're rewriting your entire relationship with possibility, and that's going to ripple out in ways you can't predict yet. Vivian sat with that for a moment, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. She'd spent 10 years being careful, being realistic, being the person who adapted to circumstances rather than demanding circumstances adapt to her. And in 3 months, Ethan had helped her remember that she could be both, someone who adapted gracefully and someone who challenged boundaries relentlessly. Thank you, she said quietly, for seeing that, for seeing me. Always. She left the garage that evening with the leg braces in their carrying case, the drawing from Jake carefully rolled in her bag, and a text from Marcus confirming her appointment with the orthopedic specialist. She drove home through familiar streets that somehow looked different now, viewed from a perspective that had shifted in ways that had nothing to do with physical height. At home, she spent 2 hours working on the Henderson contract analysis, her mind moving through financial projections with the same focused intensity she brought to physical therapy. When she finally sent the numbers to Robert, she felt the satisfaction of a problem solved, a challenge met with competence and precision. Then she put on the leg braces and practiced standing at her kitchen counter while making a late dinner. 15 minutes of standing while she chopped vegetables and boiled pasta, her legs trembling with effort but holding steady. It wasn't graceful, wasn't easy, but it was possible, and possible was rapidly becoming her favorite word. Her phone rang just as she was transferring back to the wheelchair, her muscles exhausted but satisfied. Dr. Chen's name appeared on the screen. Dr. Chen, hi, what can I do for you? Vivian, I heard from Marcus about your progress. A step, that's remarkable. It is. I'm still processing it, honestly. I want to apologize. The words came out stiff, as if Dr. Chen was unaccustomed to saying them. When you first came to me with the mechanic's observations, I approached it with too much skepticism. I should have been more open to the possibility that the original diagnosis might have been incomplete. I let statistical probability override clinical curiosity, and I'm sorry for that. Vivian felt a complicated mix of emotions. Vindication, yes, but also understanding. You were being a responsible physician, managing my expectations based on what the medical literature suggested was likely. I don't fault you for that. Perhaps, but I should have remembered that statistical likelihood doesn't account for individual variation. Every patient is a sample size of one. Dr. Chen paused. I'd like to stay involved in your care, if you're willing. Coordinate with Marcus, monitor your progress, make sure we're not missing anything important. I'd appreciate that. And Dr. Chen, thank you for calling. It means a lot that you're willing to revisit your assumptions. It's what good medicine requires, even when it's uncomfortable. Another pause. Vivian, where do you think your ceiling is, realistically? I don't know, and I've decided I'm okay with not knowing. I'm going to keep working, keep trying, and see what my body tells me is possible. The ceiling will reveal itself when I hit it, not before. That's a good attitude. Better than mine has been, certainly. Dr. Chen's voice softened. I'm proud of you. For pushing back, for advocating for yourself, for proving that sometimes the improbable is just the undiscovered possible. After the call ended, Vivian sat at her kitchen table with her now cold pasta and felt something she hadn't felt in 10 years. Complete acceptance of exactly where she was and excitement for where she might go. Not one or the other. Both. Simultaneously. Her wheelchair sat beside her, reliable and familiar. The leg braces leaned against the wall, promising and challenging. And she belonged to both realities, needed both truths, was defined by neither and empowered by each. She thought about Ethan's question from months ago. When was the last time someone asked her to stand? And she realized the more important question was when was the last time she'd given herself permission to try, to fail, to succeed, to exist in the messy middle ground between limitation and capability. The answer was now. The answer was every day. The answer was every moment she chose possibility over resignation, curiosity over certainty, growth over safety. And that, she thought as she finally ate her dinner and reviewed the day's accomplishments, one step forward, one business deal negotiated, one relationship deepened, that was more than enough. The orthopedic specialist turned out to be a woman in her 60s named Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, with silver hair pulled back in intricate braids and hands that moved with the confidence of someone who'd spent decades solving complex mechanical problems involving human bodies. Marcus sent me your files, she said, examining the braces Vivian wore with the critical eye of an engineer assessing someone else's work. Good craftsmanship, appropriate support distribution, but we can do better. These were designed for stability, which made sense when standing was theoretical. Now that you're stepping, we need to optimize for movement. What does that mean practically? Vivian asked. Lighter materials, more flexible joints, reduced support in areas where your muscle recruitment has improved. We'll essentially be designing braces that challenge you rather than protect you. Dr. Okonkwo looked up from her examination. The goal is to make your muscles work harder, not give them an easy ride. You comfortable with that? Extremely. The new braces took 3 weeks to fabricate, during which Vivian continued therapy with Marcus and daily sessions with Ethan. The stepping had become more consistent, more controlled. She could move forward in the parallel bars for 6 consecutive steps before needing to rest, could shift her weight with increasing precision, could feel the muscles engaging with less conscious effort. But she also hit her first real setback. It happened during a Wednesday session with Marcus, when she was attempting to increase her step length. She shifted her weight, moved her right foot forward with what she thought was good control, and felt her left knee buckle unexpectedly. Marcus caught her before she fell, but the moment of instability shook something loose in her confidence. I had it, she said, breathing hard from adrenaline rather than exertion. I thought I had it, and then it just gave out. Your quad's fatigued. It happens. That's why we practice in a controlled environment. Marcus was already helping her back to standing position. You want to stop for today? No, I want to try again. Vivian, there's a difference between persistence and stubbornness. Your muscles just told you they're done. Listen to them. One more try. Just one. Marcus studied her for a long moment, then shook his head. No, we're done for today. And I'm going to tell you something I should have said weeks ago. Your determination is your greatest asset and your biggest liability. You push so hard that you don't recognize when your body needs rest. That's going to lead to injury if you're not careful. The criticism stung precisely because it was accurate. Vivian had been treating recovery like a business problem. If she just worked harder, invested more time, refused to accept limitations, she'd achieve the desired outcome. But bodies weren't businesses. They had physical limits that no amount of determination could override. You're right, she admitted quietly. I've been pushing too hard. Not too hard, just too relentlessly. There's a difference between dedicated work and grinding yourself into dust. Marcus's expression softened. Take tomorrow off, rest, let your muscles recover. Come back Friday ready to work smart instead of just hard. She left the clinic frustrated and drove to Cole's auto repair, even though she didn't have a session scheduled. Ethan was in the middle of an oil change when she arrived, but he took one look at her face and wiped his hands. Bad session? Humbling session. My knee gave out mid-step and Marcus basically told me I'm pushing too hard and need to rest. She wheeled into the office, Ethan following. I know he's right. Intellectually, I know that. But all I can think is that I'm wasting time. That every day I'm not working is a day I'm not making progress. You know that's not how recovery works. I know, but knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are apparently two different things. Vivian rubbed her face with both hands. I'm tired, Ethan, not just physically, mentally. I'm tired of measuring every movement, analyzing every sensation, cataloging every small victory and setback. I'm tired of my life revolving around whether my quadriceps fired consistently this morning. Ethan pulled up the rolling stool and sat down, his expression thoughtful. When's the last time you did something just for fun? Something that had nothing to do with therapy or work or achievement? I don't know. A long time ago. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Tonight, you're going to go home, order takeout from somewhere you've never tried, watch a movie that requires zero intellectual engagement, and do absolutely nothing productive. Tomorrow, you're taking the day off, like Marcus said. And Friday, when you come back to work, you'll be rested instead of running on fumes and stubbornness. I don't know how to do nothing productive. Then it's time to learn. Because Vivian, if you burn yourself out chasing recovery, you're going to lose sight of why you wanted to recover in the first place. What's the point of being able to walk if you're too exhausted to enjoy the places you can walk to? The words hit harder than they should have, exposing a truth she'd been avoiding. She'd been so focused on the destination that she'd forgotten to question whether the journey was sustainable, whether the person she was becoming in pursuit of walking was someone she actually wanted to be. Okay, she said finally. I'll take tomorrow off. I'll rest. I'll try to remember how to do something that isn't goal-oriented. Good. And Vivian? Ethan reached out and squeezed her hand briefly. You're allowed to struggle with this. You're allowed to be tired and frustrated and uncertain. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. She went home that evening and did exactly what Ethan suggested. Ordered Thai food from a place she'd never tried, queued up an action movie that required nothing from her except passive attention, and spent 3 hours doing absolutely nothing productive. It felt strange at first, almost uncomfortable, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. But somewhere around the second hour, she felt something release in her chest, a tightness she hadn't noticed until it eased. The next day, she slept until 9, practically unheard of for someone who typically started answering emails by 6:30. She made coffee, sat on her balcony watching the city wake up around her, and let herself exist without agenda or achievement. Her legs felt heavy and sore from yesterday's session, the muscles protesting the previous weeks of relentless work. She let them rest, giving them permission to recover at their own pace. Around noon, Jake called her. Not Ethan, but Jake himself, his young voice bright with importance. Ms. Hale? It's Jake. Dad gave me his phone because I wanted to ask you something. Hi, Jake. What's up? We're going to the park this afternoon because it's nice out, and Dad says I need to run around like a normal kid instead of playing video games all day. Do you want to come? We're bringing a picnic and there's swings and stuff. Dad said I should ask if you wanted to join us. Vivian's first instinct was to decline. She had work she could be doing, exercises she could practice, a dozen productive ways to spend an afternoon. But then she remembered Ethan's question about the last time she'd done something just for fun. "I'd love to come." "What time?" 2 o'clock. We're going to Jefferson Park. Dad says it has good paths for your wheelchair and also a really cool playground. They met at the park at 2, Jake vibrating with barely contained energy, Ethan carrying a picnic basket that looked like it had seen better decades. The park was beautiful in the way city parks often were, patches of carefully maintained green space punctuated by playgrounds and walking paths, filled with families and couples and individuals all seeking a few hours of outdoor peace. "Fair warning," Ethan said as they walked toward a picnic table. Jake's idea of a picnic involves approximately 80% snacks and 20% actual food. I tried to balance it out with sandwiches, but he supervised the packing. "I heard that," Jake called from where he'd run ahead to claim a table. "And snacks are important, Dad. They're like energy fuel. That's what lunch is supposed to be. But snacks are more fun." They spread out the contents of the basket, sandwiches that were indeed outnumbered by chips, cookies, fruit snacks, and juice boxes, while Jake provided running commentary on every interesting thing he could see in the park. A dog playing fetch, a kid on a skateboard, a bird that looked like it might be a hawk, but was probably just a regular bird being dramatic. Vivian found herself laughing more in that first hour than she had in weeks. Jake's enthusiasm was infectious, his observations both insightful and absurd, his complete lack of filter refreshing after so many careful conversations with medical professionals and business associates. "Ms. Hale, can I ask you a question?" Jake said around a mouthful of sandwich. "Don't talk with your mouth full," Ethan said automatically. Jake swallowed dramatically. "Can I ask you a question?" "Of course. When you stand up now, is it scary or exciting?" The question was so quintessentially Jake, direct, curious, assuming emotional complexity was normal and worth discussing. Vivian considered it seriously. "Both," she said. "It's scary because I might fall or because my legs might not work the way I want them to, but it's exciting because I'm doing something I thought was impossible. So it's scary exciting." "Like riding a bike without training wheels?" "Exactly like that. I fell a lot when I learned to ride my bike. Dad says falling is just part of learning, and the important thing is getting back up and trying again." "Your dad is very wise." "I know, he's the best dad." Jake said it with such simple certainty that Vivian felt her throat tighten. "Are you going to be able to walk soon, like all the way without help?" "I don't know. Maybe. I'm working toward it." "Well, I think you're really brave for trying, and if you do learn to walk, that's awesome. But if you don't, you're still awesome. You have a really cool car and you're smart, and you make Dad smile a lot. That's what matters." Ethan, who'd been drinking from a water bottle, nearly choked. "Jake, buddy, maybe let's not analyze Dad's feelings in public." "But it's true. You smile more now than you did before Ms. Hale started coming to the shop. Aunt Lisa said so too." "Aunt Lisa needs to mind her own business. She said it was nice to see you happy." Jake turned back to Vivian, completely oblivious to his father's discomfort. "Do you want to go on the swings? Dad can push both of us." They spent the next hour at the playground, Vivian transferring to an accessible swing designed for wheelchair users while Jake claimed the one next to her. Ethan pushed them both, his strength sending them higher than the moment probably warranted, Jake's laughter ringing out across the park. And Vivian felt something shift inside her, a recognition that this was recovery too. Not the measured, clinical version that happened in therapy sessions, but the messy, joyful version that happened when you let yourself be part of life, instead of constantly preparing for it. The wheelchair wasn't keeping her from the swing was adapted to include her, and that distinction mattered more than she'd realized. When they finally left the park, sun-tired and full of snacks that definitely didn't constitute a balanced meal, Jake hugged Vivian goodbye with unself-conscious affection. "Thanks for coming, Ms. Hale. This was really fun." "Thank you for inviting me. I had a great time." "You should come to more stuff with us. Dad makes really good pancakes on Sundays. You could come for breakfast sometime." Vivian looked at Ethan over Jake's head, saw the question in his eyes, the vulnerability of wanting to extend the invitation, but not wanting to presume. "I'd like that," she said. "If your dad doesn't mind the company." I don't mind at all," Ethan said quietly. You're always welcome. The new braces arrived the following week, sleek and lighter than the previous version, with joints that moved with less resistance and support structures that demanded more from her muscles. Dr. Okonkwo fitted them with the same meticulous attention to detail she'd shown in the initial consultation. These are going to feel harder at first, she warned. You'll fatigue faster. You'll feel less stable. That's intentional. We're asking your body to do more of the work. She was right. The first session with the new braces was humbling. Vivian could barely stand for 5 minutes before her muscles screamed in protest, and attempting to step felt like starting over from scratch. But Marcus pushed her through it with patient insistence, and by the end of the week she was back to her previous baseline, taking 6 consecutive steps with better form and more control. The new braces are forcing better mechanics, Marcus observed during a Friday session. You're not compensating with the wrong muscle groups anymore. It's harder now, but it's building the right patterns. 2 weeks after that, Vivian took 10 consecutive steps in the parallel bars without resting, then 12, then 15. The numbers climbed with agonizing slowness, each one earned through sweat and shaking muscles and determination that bordered on obsession. But she also took Ethan's advice about balance. She started going to Sunday pancake breakfasts at his apartment, where Jake would narrate his week in exhaustive detail and Ethan would cook with easy competence, and they'd all sit around a table that was slightly too small for 3 people and feel like something that might generously be called family. She scheduled 1 day a week with no therapy, no work projects that couldn't wait, just space to exist without achievement. Sometimes she used it for reading, sometimes for driving to the coast just to watch the ocean, sometimes for sitting in coffee shops and people watching like she used to do before ambition and adaptation consumed all her available time. And slowly, incrementally, she found herself becoming someone new. Not the person she'd been before the accident. That version was gone, lost to time and circumstance. Not just the person who'd built a company from a wheelchair either. Someone else. Someone who contained multitudes, who was defined by choices rather than limitations, who understood that recovery wasn't a destination, but a continuous process of becoming. 3 months after the new braces arrived, Marcus introduced her to a walker. Not the kind elderly people used for stability, but a sophisticated forearm support model designed for people relearning ambulation. It was adjustable, lightweight, and slightly intimidating. We're going to try walking outside the parallel bars, Marcus said, with the walker for support. Your muscle recruitment is consistent enough now that I think you're ready. The first attempt was terrifying. Without the bars on either side, Vivian felt exposed, vulnerable, like walking a tightrope without a net. She gripped the walker handles with white-knuckled intensity, shifted her weight onto her right leg, and moved her left foot forward approximately 4 inches. Good. Again. She took another step, then another. On the 4th step, her right knee wavered, and she caught herself on the walker, breathing hard. That's okay. You caught yourself. The walker did its job. Keep going. By the end of that session, she'd walked 20 feet with the walker before needing to transfer back to the wheelchair. 20 feet of independent movement, her own muscles bearing her weight, her own determination carrying her forward. She called Ethan from the parking lot again, the habit so ingrained now that she didn't question it. I walked with a walker, 20 feet, without parallel bars. Vivian, that's amazing. How do you feel? Like I want to do it again, like I want to see how far I can go. She paused, like I'm finally becoming someone I recognize. You were always someone worth recognizing. You're just adding to the story. Can I come by the shop? I want to show you something. When she arrived at Cole's Auto Repair, she had the walker in her car. Ethan helped her transfer it out, his expression curious and supportive. The garage bay was empty, the afternoon light slanting through the open door. You're going to walk here? He asked. I'm going to try. I need you to see this. You started all of this. You should see what it's become. She fitted the new braces, positioned herself with the walker, and took a breath. Then she stood, the motion smoother now after months of practice, and began to walk. Slow, careful steps, her muscles trembling with effort, but holding steady. 10 feet, 15, 20. Ethan walked beside her, close enough to help if she needed it, but giving her space to do this herself. His expression held wonder and pride and something else that made her heart beat faster. At 25 feet, she stopped, her muscles exhausted but triumphant. She looked at Ethan and found him watching her with undisguised emotion. "You did it," he said, his voice rough. "You're walking." "I'm walking," she confirmed, and then she laughed, the sound breaking free from someplace deep and unguarded. "I'm actually walking." "How does it feel?" "Like remembering something I'd forgotten I knew. Like coming home to a body I thought I'd lost." She paused. "Like everything you said was possible wasn't just kindness. It was truth." Ethan stepped closer, his hands hovering near hers on the walker, not touching, but present. "I'm so proud of you. For fighting for this. For not giving up when everyone told you to accept less. For proving that asking questions matters. I couldn't have done this without you. Without that first question. Without you showing up every day. Without you making me believe that trying wasn't foolish. You did this. I just gave you permission to try what you already had the strength to achieve." They stood there in the garage bay, Vivian upright with the walker, Ethan beside her, the afternoon light painting everything in warm gold. And Vivian felt the weight of everything they'd shared over the past months. The vulnerability, the setbacks, the incremental victories, the quiet moments of connection that had built something neither of them had planned for. "Ethan," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." "Okay." What we've been doing, it started as therapy. You helping me explore what was possible physically. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that. You became more than that. She met his gaze steadily, despite the fear of rejection, the uncertainty of crossing this line. "You see me. Not the wheelchair, not the diagnosis, not the success or the struggle. Just me. And I haven't felt that seen in longer than I can remember." Ethan's expression softened with understanding and something that looked like relief. "I see you because you're worth seeing, because you're remarkable and stubborn and brilliant and brave, because you make Jake laugh and push back when I'm wrong and refuse to accept limitations anyone tries to impose." He paused. "And because somewhere along the way, I stopped being able to imagine what my days would look like without you in them." "So what do we do with that?" Vivian asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know. But I know I don't want to ignore it. I know that what we have, this friendship, this partnership, this whatever it is, matters to me. And I think it might matter to you too." "It does. It matters more than I know how to articulate." Ethan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted, and covered her hand with his on the walker handle. The touch was warm, grounding, full of promise and possibility. "Then we figure it out," he said. "Same way we figured out everything else. We try, we adjust, we don't give up when it's complicated. Sound good?" "Sounds perfect." They stayed like that for a long moment, connected by touch and understanding and the shared knowledge that they'd built something worth protecting. Then Vivian's muscles started trembling with fatigue, and Ethan helped guide her back to the wheelchair with gentle hands and careful attention. "You should rest," he said. "That was a lot of work." "It was, but it was worth it." She looked up at him, feeling bold and vulnerable at once. "Same time tomorrow?" "Same time tomorrow, and every day after that for as long as you want." "I want a long time." "Then that's what we'll do." The following weeks brought continued progress, both in therapy and in the relationship that was cautiously, carefully building between them. Vivian worked up to walking 50 feet with the walker, then 75, then 100. Marcus started talking about transitioning to a cane for short distances, about reducing brace support even further, about the possibility of independent standing without external structure. But Vivian also learned to listen to her body's limits, to rest when she needed rest, to accept that some days would show progress, and others would be about maintenance. She learned that recovery wasn't linear, that setbacks didn't erase achievements, that the wheelchair was still necessary and valuable even as she expanded her mobility options. And she learned what it felt like to be part of something bigger than herself. Jake started calling her Aunt Vivian without prompting, the title bestowed with 7-year-old authority that brooked no argument. Lisa welcomed her into the family with the same matter-of-fact acceptance she showed everyone Ethan cared about. Even Robert at work noticed the change, commenting that she seemed lighter somehow, more present. 6 months after that first step in Marcus's clinic, Vivian stood in her office, Actually stood, with a cane for balance but no braces, no walker, just her own muscles and determination, and looked out the window at the city spread below. Her phone rang. Ethan's name on the screen. "Hey," she answered. "Hey yourself. How's the standing going?" "I've been upright for 10 minutes. No braces, just the cane. My legs are shaking, but they're holding." "That's incredible, Vivian. Are you going to walk?" "In a minute. I'm just taking it in. The view looks different from up here. Everything looks different." "Good different?" "The best different." She paused, then made a decision that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. "Ethan, I'm going to walk to the door. Without the wheelchair. Just me and the cane. And then I'm going to get in my car and drive to your shop. And when I get there, I'm going to walk inside. Because I think it's time we stopped pretending this is just about physical therapy." She could hear the smile in his voice. "I'll be waiting, for as long as it takes." Vivian ended the call, gripped her cane, and took the first step toward the door. Then another. Then another. Each one was slow, deliberate, hard-won. Each one was possible. The Mustang was parked in her reserved spot when she finally made it outside. The drive down having required the wheelchair, but feeling like less of a defeat now that she understood it as a tool rather than a limitation. She drove to Cole's Auto Repair with the windows down, the spring air carrying the scent of possibility and new beginnings. Ethan was waiting in the parking lot when she arrived, Jake beside him with that gap-toothed grin that had become so familiar and dear. She transferred to her wheelchair for the distance across the parking lot. Practical, efficient, smart. But when she reached the garage entrance, she stood up with her cane. "I'm going to walk in," she told them. "Watch me." And she did. Slow, careful steps, the cane providing balance, her muscles doing work they'd relearned over months of patient effort. Jake cheered like she was crossing a marathon finish line. Ethan watched with eyes that held tears and pride, and something that looked a lot like love. When she reached him, slightly breathless but triumphant, he took her free hand. "You did it," he said. "You walked in." "I did. No parallel bars, no walker, just me and determination and a cane I might not always need." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you. For asking the question, for showing up, for seeing possibility when everyone else saw limitation. Thank you for answering, for trusting me enough to try, for proving that sometimes the experts don't know everything." Ethan pulled her closer, careful of her balance, mindful of her cane. "Vivian Hale, you are the most remarkable person I've ever met, and I'd really like to kiss you right now, if that's okay." "That's more than okay." He kissed her there in the garage bay, surrounded by the smell of motor oil and the sound of Jake making exaggerated gagging noises in the background, and Vivian felt something click into place. Not completion. She wasn't done growing, done recovering, done becoming whoever she was meant to be. But rightness. The sense that she'd found people and a place where all her contradictions could coexist, where she could be successful and vulnerable, strong and still learning, capable in a wheelchair and also capable on her feet. When they finally pulled apart, Jake was tugging on Ethan's sleeve. "Dad, does this mean Aunt Vivian is going to be around even more? Because that would be really cool. She could come to my baseball games and help me with homework and maybe teach me about running a business so I can be rich when I grow up." "I think Aunt Vivian might be around a lot more," Ethan confirmed, looking at her with a question in his eyes. "I think that sounds perfect," Vivian said, "though we should probably work on the getting rich motivation. Maybe focus on building something meaningful instead." "But meaningful things can also make money, right? You did it." "Fair point. Okay, we'll work on meaningful and financially successful." They spent the rest of the afternoon together, Vivian alternating between the wheelchair and walking with the cane as her energy allowed, Jake providing running commentary on everything from baseball to the injustice of having to eat vegetables. Ethan watching both of them with an expression that suggested he couldn't quite believe this was his life now. As the sun started to set and Jake began the inevitable wind down toward cranky that preceded bedtime, Vivian prepared to leave. She transferred back to her wheelchair for the drive home, the Mustang's hand controls as familiar as ever. "Same time tomorrow?" Ethan asked, the question carrying weight beyond just therapy schedules. "Same time tomorrow," Vivian confirmed, Though I should warn you, I'm going to need to start reducing session frequency soon. Marcus thinks I'm ready for more independence, and I've got some business travel coming up, but that doesn't mean I'm disappearing. Good, because I'm not ready for you to disappear. He leaned down and kissed her again, soft and sweet and full of promise. We'll figure out what this looks like. Together. Together sounds good. Vivian drove home as the city lights began to flicker on around her, the Mustang's engine purring with familiar confidence. The modifications were still there, still perfect, still necessary for the life she'd built. But now they were complemented by leg braces in her trunk, a cane on the passenger seat, and the knowledge that she had options. At home, she practiced standing without braces, gripping the kitchen counter for balance, feeling her muscles engage and hold. 10 minutes. 15. When she finally transferred back to the wheelchair, her legs were trembling but satisfied. She made dinner standing up, not the whole time, but enough to feel the difference, to remember what it was like to cook at counter height without modifications. Then she sat at her table, the wheelchair pulled up comfortably, and reviewed the day's emails while eating pasta she'd made herself. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen. Saw your latest test results from Marcus. Remarkable progress. I owe you an apology for doubting, and a thank you for teaching me to question my assumptions. Vivian typed back. No apology needed. You were being a good doctor. Sometimes patients know things doctors don't. We make a good team when we listen to each other. Another text, this one from Marcus. Next week we're going to try stairs. Think you're ready? I'm ready, she responded, and meant it. A third text from Ethan. Jake wanted me to tell you he thinks you're awesome, and he can't wait for Sunday pancakes. Also, I think you're awesome. Also, I'm really glad you walked into my shop that day. She smiled, her heart full of warmth and possibility, and typed, I'm glad too. More than I know how to say. See you tomorrow. The last text was from Robert. The Henderson deal closed. Profit margins exactly where you projected. You're terrifying when you're right, which is always. Also, whatever you've been doing lately, keep doing it. You seem happy. I am happy, she wrote back. For the first time in a long time, I'm exactly where I need to be. That night, before bed, Vivian stood in her bedroom wearing the leg braces, gripping her cane, and took 10 steps from the closet to the window. It wasn't far. It wasn't impressive by most standards. But it was hers, earned through months of work, supported by people who'd refused to accept limitations, built on a foundation of stubborn hope and relentless determination. She looked out at the city lights, at the world that had once felt like it was moving on without her, and felt herself fully part of it again. Not because she could walk, though that mattered, but because she'd learned to question, to push back, to demand answers instead of accepting dismissals. Because she'd found people who saw her as whole regardless of how she moved through space. Because she'd given herself permission to try, to fail, to try again, to succeed in ways she'd been told were impossible. The wheelchair sat beside her bed, reliable and necessary. The braces leaned against the wall, promising and challenging. The cane rested in easy reach, supportive without being limiting. And Vivian belonged to all of it, needed all of it, was defined by none of it. She was a CEO who'd built a company from nothing, a woman who'd survived an accident and its aftermath with grace and grit, a person who used a wheelchair and also sometimes walked, someone who loved a mechanic and his son and the life they were building together, a human being who contained multitudes, who was still growing, still changing, still becoming. And as she finally transferred to bed, her muscles pleasantly exhausted, her heart full of contentment, Vivian understood that this was what recovery really meant. Not returning to who you were before, not even becoming who you thought you'd be, but growing into someone new, someone shaped by struggle and strength, by loss and gain, by all the small moments of choosing to try again when giving up would have been easier. The red pendant from the crash sat on her nightstand, returned to her by the man who'd kept it safe for a decade. She picked it up, felt its familiar weight, and smiled. Tomorrow she'd stand again. Tomorrow she'd take more steps. Tomorrow she'd continue building this new life that was both nothing like she'd planned and better than she'd imagined. But tonight she was enough, exactly as she was, wheelchair and braces and cane and all. And that, finally, was everything.